Aro Eurinyan. How are you? Fine, thank you. I wish I were a bird. Okay, I promise I'm not going absolutely bonkers. My connection seems to be slow, and I'm not sure why. So can people hear me, see me? Because again, I don't know why it's showing only one bar of internet. Slight glitch. Well, hopefully that fixes it, because it hasn't been a problem last time, and I'm no longer on Wi-Fi. Things just have to be difficult for the sake of being difficult, I suppose. Damn it. Tell the neighbor not to move the modem. Well, hopefully the situation ameliorates itself rather quickly. But I'm not downloading anything, so this is just annoying and unnecessarily so. 6K, I'm still 56K. Okay. Athanasius has been shirking his moderating duties, but you know, it is what it is. Choppy video, but I don't understand why. Okay, we'll proceed for now. Let the people gather a bit more. I mean, if it gets to the point that I can't use my whiteboard, then we're going to be having problems. Otherwise, it's fine. So, blame the Albanians. Yes. I also got a haircut, which is a very rare thing for me to do. And I hate getting haircuts. So if you want to know how petty and grumpy I am, yes, I also hate getting haircuts. Even in summer, when it's very helpful not to have a giant mane on your head that just scorches everything, and you feel like the little brain you've got gets cooked, obliterated. Whoops, go away. Okay. Yes, I am on the Ethernet, and this wasn't a problem the last time. But I don't know what could be taking up bandwidth. But it's fine. So I announced this stream on Thursday, or rather this series. And I was even talking with Chase to try and calculate, how many words per stream I can go through without it being either overwhelming, because if you go into analyzing separate words and you don't particularly have experience with studying etymology or different languages, it gets tiring very quickly. Sort of like you can learn lyrics to a song in a language you don't understand, but you just remember the phonetics. You just remember producing the sounds in a particular sequence. but that is much easier to forget also than it is to forget, a properly understood song. Even though it might be more archaic English, for example, you will still have a way to coalesce them into these points of information that you can relay. But otherwise, if you just have a sequence of phonemes, you're going to have a bad time. So, right. Good evening, good evening. At least it is here. I've learned to close my doors and everything so we don't get dogs to annoy us. And by us, I mean mostly me and the people who also hate it. But again, this microphone, is that a dog? Because I swear to God, I'll start committing crimes. Right, so we've got my whiteboard ready. Oh, God. Okay, I'll have to go and close more bloody windows. Be back in a moment. How can you hate puppies? Resident Sleeper, if you're mailing me a dog, I'm expecting it to be mailed in some type of Godfather method. In which case, you can send me, make my day. I don't know. I remember for at least one summer, I think it was 2 summers, there was a neighbor's dog who was very old, and in summer you leave the windows open, and the dog was literally dying for weeks. Just keep going. Great. It's like watching, what was Walking Dead. Bloody hell. My co-worker was traumatized by a pit bull knocking him off his bicycle when he was a young boy. Yeah, I had no particularly bad experience. They're just evil, and I don't like evil. Okay, we're up to almost 60 people. So, I don't know. I don't think, last time we got to about 70, but it's not going to get much higher than this. But hopefully people don't miss out. So before I start anything else, I remember when my uncle went to university, they still allowed smoking. So they would smoke in the classroom, like in the amphitheater, which must have been just epic. Wait till 66.6 people. Chase is 0.6 of a people, because as Andrew has divulged information to us, he has 4'1". So he counts as 0.6 of a person. Right. Are you going to be hosting the Pan-Gypsy inclined country panel? Pan-Gypsy inclined? Yeah, I remember, because we had affirmative action before you guys knew what it was, because we were a communist country. And I knew this girl who wrote poems and went to the same university as I did. And we were waiting for consultation with the same professor who taught, what's it called, literary theory. And the professor was so upset at the literary theory colloquium and how she performed, she threw her out of the office. So yeah, it's the same thing. If you get into it without the competency to deal with what's supposed to happen, the amount of information you're supposed to absorb, the amount of studying you have to do, the skills you need, you're just going to fail miserably. So yes, affirmative action was as shite here as it was anywhere else. So yes, right. So to introduce the topic in general, the important thing is to remember that when you're reading a text, as I said in the description, the text doesn't speak to you. There is no way of simply drawing out the semantic value of words just by looking at them. You need to study, you need to learn, and you also need to adjust for all sorts of things. It can be just geographic. You don't even have to go historical on it. You can just go and take a book from a different part of the country that's written in that particular dialect, and you can have all sorts of differences there. Nowadays, that's not that much of a factor. It is pretty much a factor, but not that much of a factor as it was historically. Because historically, you didn't have today's mass media, you didn't have mass education. So far more parochial of a predicament you would find yourself in when you're trying to communicate someone who doesn't even live that far away, because they would develop their own idiosyncrasies in how they speak, how they spell, how they pronounce, what a particular word means in what particular area. You also have these generalities. I mentioned that the word pippin is an old word for apple, but an apple was a word that was also used in English to describe fruit in general, right? So it wouldn't make sense nowadays to say, oh, a banana is an apple, but it would have made sense to people quite some time ago, which is also why you would find the idea that the fruit of the tree of good and evil was an apple. It's not a literal apple, right? Pineapple. But these are things you need to adjust for. So the reason why Sola Scriptura would have to operate, or would have to deviate from falling from all the other texts that can be misinterpreted in this particular manner, is just special pleading, saying, oh yes, but the Bible is from God and the Holy Spirit will lead us to read it properly. But that is not a promise anyone gets, and it is rather visible that the consequences of this approach leads to nothing but endless branching out of the Protestant, I don't know, you can't call it a single church, but these Protestant groups keep branching out, keep breaking off from each other, and tend to be held together, if they're not hierarchical, mostly by the charisma of of particular preachers and pastors. And once they die, very rarely do they survive being one single thing. Because you also have this idea that, oh, maybe Luther started a thing but couldn't finish it. I've heard people make this claim, this argument, that that Luther was constrained by history and couldn't go as far as should have been gone, or even that he lacked certain information which we no longer lack, and therefore this church of, you know, the church of the Pastor Bob, you know, is now the fullness. We have achieved that apex of proper interpretation and exegesis of Scripture. However, there is a problem that I will try to explain to you with a bit of a take on a hypothetical take. It's not my actual take, on a conspiracy theory. And I ask people, do you believe, if you believed that the moon landing was faked because the Soviets were winning the space race, the so-called space race, so people had to find a way to do one over on them, you know, one up them, and to win the space race, because it was a massive, you know, battle between the liberal West and the communist East. So they needed the win. Otherwise, we'd all go to the gulags, right? It's a stupid take, but I'm saying hypothetically, if that was the case, and I say it because it would be the best possible reasons you could give, you know. Okay, what would happen then if someone discovered that it was impossible to get to the moon for whatever reason? Think of whatever reason, you know, there's space ghosts that don't let you do it. How would you go about correcting that? Well, you can't really correct for it, because you said you went there and you were the official scientists, right? And you did it for the best reasons imaginable, you know, trying to keep people out of the gulags. But now you have this discovery that would you would have to retroactively say, oh yes, we went there, but we couldn't do it. So, you know, there's no way of now of fixing the problem. So you either have to ignore this new discovery, or basically admit that you were lying, you were wrong, or you were just, you know, duped by people who came before you. Likewise, it's strange how no one in the Protestant realm, except for maybe like Methodists, are willing to correct the original takes on salvation, the soteriological position that people have taken over a course of time. Because they can correct for all sorts of things, right? You can be Kent Hovind and say, oh, men lived with dinosaurs and yada, yada, yada. And in kids in heaven, you all have your own pet dinosaur, right? So you can correct for that, right? We'll all have pet dinosaurs, apparently. There are people who can say, oh, flat earth. There are people who can say, oh, God wanted this particular sociopolitical structuring of society. Oh, God actually wasn't against homosexuality, really. You know, God wasn't patriarchal. God, as we heard from the Sparkle Creed, God is, you know, gender non-binary, right? Aren't Methodists just Baptists who can read? That's an outstanding summation of it. But they cannot really go back on what they would consider to be fundamental things, right? Because one of the solas is sola fide, right? Sola fide meaning faith alone. You're saved by faith alone, through sola gratia, grace alone. and you're not going to be able to then correct for it, lest you become the guy who said, oh, we went to the moon, but it's impossible to go to it. Right? So that's what I'm trying to say here, basically, that this has some type of idea that there's a progression, but there also isn't, because there's also it's eternal, but we can also improve it, and it's clear, but it can mean different things to different people. And some say this interpretation is the correct one. These say, oh, there's multiple interpretations which can be correct. There is no united methodology around it. And the worst thing is that people who live in a certain time period, in a certain place as well, they tend to fall under the influence of understanding words in their lived experience, which is not something that's bad. It's not because they're lazy. The reason that happens is because words, how can we say, words derive their meaning from how they're used. So, like I said, Jim Bob's volume 5 of Savage Memes is coming out, available for pre-order still, if I'm not mistaken. The word savage and the word meme, you are going to you would have a serious problem if you don't adjust for their colloquial meaning, how we use them in everyday interactions, right? Let me see if someone says something. So is it like scales? If the good outweighs the bad, you are good to go. Not really. That's a different topic I'll address. Maybe because today we'll be talking about the idea of justice and judging. So maybe we'll touch on it, but that's for either the Q&A later or something. Maybe address it a different time, because the scales are also important, how they're used. Just to give you an indication, one of the biggest reasons in Revelations you have one of the 4 horsemen carrying weights is that a lot of the easiest way people would scam you is by using faulty weights, right? Intentionally faulty weights. So it's sort of this idea that one of these is going to cause immense amounts of hunger because he will render food so expensive, but that's a different topic. What does a Protestant Canadian say when he gets high? Sola weed, eh? Sola. I'm one of the few people who knows how to pronounce a boat and not say a boot. Sola Coca-Cola. Bosch, you're brilliant, but your internet connection leaves something lacking. I know. I talked about it earlier. I don't know why it's doing this. Last time it didn't. But that's something that will have to be fixed in the future. It is what it is for now. If you have more than one Sola, it is not only this anymore. I've heard that argument, and it's not necessarily a good argument, because you're sort of saying only this, but in response to this other thing. So if you have Sola Scriptura, that's a retort to scriptures and tradition. If you have faith alone, sola fide, it's faith as opposed to works and faith. So it's sort of a response to something. If you have Soli Deo Gloria, glory to God alone, it's sort of saying, oh, you don't need the saints, you don't need, Mary and whoever, or angels or whatever. It's not as much of an affirmative statement as they would claim to be reforming the church, forming it again, repairing it. They're sort of saying this is a corrective statement on what has, from their perspective, been a corruption. Hope we can agree that the scriptures are the available apostolic deposit. We would not say that it's the only one, but sure, why not? I don't see a reason to object to that. So maybe if I could lower the camera settings a bit. There we go. Hopefully that would mitigate the problems a bit. What if your only work are you a dull boy? I don't know, maybe you're just German. Sorry. That was my cue to have some beer. But Matthew, since you're here, I'll give an example that I didn't get to present last time. I'm not going to be addressing the word faith today, but I can give you a way in which an old usage of the word is still used today. So Jim Bob says some of these freeze frames are really condescending. Yeah, it tends to happen when you're a grumpy old man at heart. But again, it is what it is. So yes, the example I wanted to give Matthew. We have the word infidelity, right? Infidelity, we find in the middle of that word, we find fide, right? Fide, the F-I-D-E. Infidelity means being unfaithful, right? Unfaithfulness. But you are not unfaithful in the sense that you don't believe in your spouse, you don't believe that your spouse exists or is, I don't know, some type of status she or he would have or something. It is the opposite of being faithful, of having, so it's not a belief in a proposition. It is a way of living your life, specifically in this case, the married life, that you are not living in a particular, in a good way. That's why you call it infidelity. It is bad faith. This opposite would be good faith. So the opposite of being faithless is being faithful. Likewise, it's not about rejecting that, Jesus, I don't know, Jesus, had a certain hue of skin or length of hair or type of facial hair. It's not about that. It's living a life that is not conducive to living a life faithful to God, right? That is why infidelity as a word still retains the old meaning. But now when we say faith, also when we read the scriptures and we read the word faith, we sort of just mean belief, this mental assent to a proposition. And that is not a good way to understand it. And that's why I wanted to bring up a word that is still in use today and retains the old meaning. But again, we will do a stream that analyzes the word faith because it's a very difficult topic to approach. So today I want to talk specifically about the word justice, how we conceive of it, how the Bible conceives of it, and how that applies to certain parts of the Bible. And again, the point of these streams is to give you a more practical way to deal with things. So, of course, Archangel Uriel says that wife right there ain't real. Yes, you see? And when someone mentions faithful, you can mention the word infidelity, because we all know that it pertains to action, not to mental assent to propositions, because that's what it always means. People try to say, oh, the Greek pistis, that is what it actually means, faithfulness. No, the word faith itself used to mean that, but lost the meaning. So faithful became exclusively when you mean acting in a certain way, to be with faith, and faith in and of itself just means belief, right? You're a pseudo posh. Did you try to write pseudo and then autocorrect added an O? Hello, Rachel. Freeze frame topic combo keeps me sitting up straight. Yes, this is all a CIA experiment, or KGB, I suppose, because I'm from Eastern Europe. So I started talking about justice. Likewise, I'm going to try and give you a couple of places in the scriptures that you can bring up to people that will show them how we're supposed to understand judgment, because people use it in all types of ways. And we will start, I was thinking whether to start with the etymology of it in English specifically, or start from where the concept would be derived as far as the Bible is concerned. Because the Bible was written in a historical context. And those who would claim that they are, God wrote it in a certain way that any time you read it, you get it properly, but the problem with that is, me, like many other people, think the NIV, for example, is just completely and utterly unreliable. So now the translation can be a problem. Well, okay, so what, do we go and study biblical Hebrew? Do we study Paleo Hebrew, even though we don't have the originals? Paleo Hebrew that the Pentateuch would have been written in, right? Do we study Koine Greek? Do we study the Aramaic for certain portions of the Old Testament, specifically, when we get to Daniel? Right, and then where was all the simplicity that we were supposed to deal with? And KGB alone, I don't even want to deal with the notion because it's so bloody silly. We got up to 90 people, just reminding people, for some reason my internet is acting out and I have no idea why. So sorry, if you can deal with it, please do. If you can't, I can't blame you. And many of you will be just listening, so yes. I hope, because people are reporting to me that it is actually working. The audio isn't creating any problems. Right, so cigarette to go. Right, so the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch, we can say, was also written in a historical context. It was written, again, I'm going to say, provisionally say, written by Moses, because it has been subject to editing for historical purposes, because the scriptures were used. Gvozden Jovanovic. Yes, more Serbs. Wonderful. We are taking over. Not sure what we're taking over, but, I'm sure we are. So, basically, we have this Moses character who grew up in Egypt. And we have a lot of words in Hebrew that are very influenced by Egyptian. For example, the word seraph, which is the singular form of seraphim, basically means a serpent, right? And I've heard people like Inspiring Philosophy conclude from that, by using a non sequitur, I will say, that the seraphim are some type of serpentine angels, and then they try to say, oh, it must mean that Satan was a seraph because he was a serpent, and yada 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 yada. Rather nonsensical, because the reason why the serpent is important is that in Egyptian mythology and culture and symbolism, you will notice that a serpent is very closely related to the throne. So that's why you have the pharaohs who wear the capes of or like crowns that symbolize the cape of a cobra. I think it's called a cape. Okay, and then you've got the little serpent at the forehead. You've got, if you look up all sorts of thrones in ancient Egypt, you will notice that they also tend to have these serpentine creatures, carved into them, etc. So they are throne guardians. That is the serpentine, the serpentine symbolism, and why it carried over into Hebrew, and how we understand the seraphim, right? But and as I said, I believe it's a faux pas. It's a non sequitur for someone like inspiring philosophy to conclude from the fact that etymologically it derives from the word serpent, that means that ontologically this rank of angels are serpentine. That's not a good conclusion to draw. So that's one way of thinking about it. Another is the idea of justice, because I would argue that historically speaking, and considering the moment we inhabit, for quite a while, our idea of justice, judgment or judiciary, is something we tend to associate with the judiciary branch, right? When we talk about, you're sentencing, more like sentencing someone to something. It has this penal aspect to it. So when this is Montesquieu, right, of this tripartite division of government, the executive, legislative, and the judiciary. So the judicial branch is sort of what we tend to deal with when we think of justice, right? The blindfolded lady, justice is blind, yada, yada, yada. And therefore, when we read, for example, an entire book, it's called the Book of Judges. But then we think, okay, so sort of you have books of the Bible that can be seen as the law because God is the legislator. And then you have the judges who sort of judges pertains to that legal code. And then you've got the executive, which is, the underlings of the judges. But again, that is not a conclusion you can draw because it's completely ahistoric. You're reading a very modern way of governance back into, we're even well before, the Greeks. So extremely anachronistic. But since we're talking about Egypt, what is the Egyptian understanding of justice and how historically these people would have understood this word having come out of Egypt? Well, I will be invoking my whiteboard. We have this entity. Whoops, bloody hell! My spelling is atrocious. Right, I don't know if this will even show, but if you saw that, it is the name Ma'at. So Ma'at is supposed to be this daughter of Ra and Hathor, and she is the reason you associated with her is that you will find that Ma'at also be translated as someone says very appropriately, focus on the audio today. Yeah, I've learned to write funny letters for no reason whatsoever, apparently. But Ma'at, I don't know if I should spell it in the chat, so at least something you get out of it. Right. Okay. So Ma'at is also associated with order. Now, I shouldn't even say also, because order and justice for the ancient conception are literally the same thing. So when we talk about justice today, we have sort of already filtered out this understanding by the implementation of Christianity and it being the dominant way of thinking. And then we have an understanding of what a good order is supposed to be like. But also that can be corrupted by different interpretations of the scriptures. So you see how it sort of loops back in. So if you read, the statement in 1 Samuel that God asks Samuel, why is he upset that the people want a king, when that is a betrayal of him and not Samuel, right? So people have concluded for that, oh, God hates monarchy. And that's something we'll address another time. That's not the conclusion, again, to draw from it. The idea is they wanted a king like the other nations to lead them out and bring them back in, which means they wanted someone, to lead them into conquest. So they wanted a very pagan thing, which was against God's purpose for creating Israel. But if you conclude from that God hates monarchy, you're going to say, well, monarchy is inherently unjust. So why might that be? Is it because people used to worship kings and emperors as gods? The pagans did it, at least. Or if you ask, the Puritans, then literally all, monarchs are literally demonic and whatever. If you conclude that, then you're going to retroactively interpret justice in a manner that excludes the idea of having a monarchy. So if you don't have a monarchy, why do you not have monarchy? You're going to have, because it's unfair and therefore unjust to have this person with more power than the other people. So it's this type of egalitarianism that you conclude from it, not necessarily, equity, but at least egalitarianism, basic egalitarianism. But that is, again, context dependent. And you see how people might conclude, but that's using scripture to interpret scripture. And no, it's not. God, as I said, has no problem with monarchy. The problem is if you want to have the monarchy like the pagan nations. So back to Ma'at, you have the opposite of her, and I think it's called Isfet. That I'm not sure even how to spell. I think it's ISFET. But this is chaos. Okay? So the opposite of justice is chaos, which just goes to show you again that order is justice and vice versa. They're interchangeable at this time and place. Now, this is something you also find in Aristotle and Plato. It's the idea that justice, and in Greek, the most oftenly used word is dikaiosini. I don't have a Greek, keyboard set up here, so sorry about that. But the thing is, dikaiosini, which also pertains to law, right? Also, they conclude that it's about things being in order, people of certain qualities occupying certain positions that they should occupy. That is how they understood justice. The same thing will also go on into the Roman understanding, with justitia, which is actually where you get your word justice, as it, goes through different linguistic filters historically and geographically. But you get the idea that justice is the proper order of things. So what does it mean to judge then? It means to set things in such a way that the proper order is achieved. And last stream, we had the Dame fellow who said, whom I mentioned to, the idea that there are people who defend soul sleep because they concluded that it doesn't make sense that you're judged after death and then also a judgment day. It's double jeopardy. so, God would not do double jeopardy. But it's the problem then is that if you have this understanding of to judge as a legal ruling, that is a proper that does follow. But because it's not the appropriate understanding of things, you are distorting the teachings. So if you're set in one order now, you could be set in a different order tomorrow, depending on the circumstances, depending on the purposes of God, for example, or depending on the purposes of the monarch, right? So maybe you're an excellent, orator, and usually you go and give speeches on certain subjects that are more philosophical. But then a war arises, and you need the king requests of you to. You can ascribe surreptitiousness and say the king wants you to rile people up into a war frenzy, but it doesn't have to be surreptitious. It can be completely genuine. Or you can be a person who, usually makes hunting bows, and now war is upon us, so you need to be commissioned to build war bows. Okay, so this is the thing. That is what you can call judgment. So it's an improper conclusion once you adjust for its historical meaning. Another way we use judgment is to say, judge not lest ye be judged, correct? And the problem with that is people take it almost as thinking poorly of someone, it's, I don't know, estimating some of their actions or behaviors as bad or evil. That's to judge. It's to discern, discriminate, analyze, but in a negative manner. And again, that's not what it means. Judge not lest ye be judged is basically saying, as Christ says in multiple times in multiple ways, you are going to be treated the way you treat others. So if you are not forgiving, God will not forgive you. Very simple. The Lord's Prayer says it very clearly, and forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That as we forgive, that's not even synchronicity, that says, forgive us our trespasses in the manner that we forgive those who trespass against us. So there's this reciprocity. And all sorts of parables which say, if you're going to, stone this woman, you who are without sin cast the first stone. It's not that she wasn't at fault. And Christ says, go and sin no more, right? But that is also how if you adjust again for the meaning of this word, what Christ says is now in a completely different light. And I'm going to give you some examples here. So this is my favorite, and I think you should write it down somewhere because it's a bit funny, although depends on what you mean by funny. And that is Isaiah 1:17. I'll actually put it in the chat. 1:17. Paste this. That should be it. You see, I'm learning to deal with technology. I'm advancing. So it says, Isaiah 1:17, learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, and this is the important part, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow. So you see, if you take judge the fatherless, if you go with a very colloquial manner of using the word, as in like, oh my God, do you see that guy? He doesn't even have a father. How does that make sense? Or if you want to be consistent, then be consistent. and conclude that. I won't be able to defend you. The other one is to say, what, like, there's some type of penal code against being against having no father, because I'm pretty sure that's that's not a decision someone would make lightly or anything. Patricide, although was a massive evil in all pagan cultures, because of the idea of authority, which is order associated with order, which is equivalent to justice. So, but you see, it is nested, this judge the fatherless, is nested between leave the oppressed and plead for the widow. Why? Because when we talk about setting things in order, we're not talking about negative things necessarily. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes you need to exact punishment on people for certain actions. But at the same time, to judge the fatherless in the context of both just this verse, but also of the general things that God commands throughout the Old Testament, to take care of the widows is to put them in a proper order, because the way society worked was that women without a husband would not be taken very seriously, because people care for what the man of the house has to say, the patriarch of the family. And if you haven't got that, well, you're sort of bargained. But God says, no, this is the proper way to operate, to have the patriarchy. But if a woman loses a husband in war, or to bandits or whatever, to illness, the others are commanded to take care of her. That is what God commands multiple times. Even saying, I won't even destroy Jerusalem if you start taking care of the orphans and the widows and everyone. So that's not mutually exclusive, either, I don't know, it's fine to get divorced and whatever, but, or you have to say, if a woman loses her husband, or a child loses their father, all of a sudden you can ignore them, because God wouldn't allow it to happen otherwise. God commands, again, nested between relieving the oppressed and pleading for the widow, that you should judge the fatherless. And that is something we should take into account. But you can't do it unless you have this ancient understanding of the word judgment, which is appropriately used in the Bible. Matthew, we can talk about that later if you can call in. I'd like to go to a similar verse. We're going to Psalm 68. Yes, Psalm 68. Okay, so verse 5, but it's basically talking about the Lord. This is a very commonly heard thing in Orthodox services. Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered. Let them also that hate him flee before him. It's also a big part of our daily prayers. So verse 5, Psalm 68, verse 5. Again, I'm going to paste that here. 68, I'll write Psalm 68, 5. Right. I'm using the KJV, by the way. I'm using the King James Version. I'm not trying to go for any inferior versions or whatever. Says, a father of the fatherless and a judge of the widows is God in his holy habitation. Right. I'm saying this is very similar to the last thing. Judge of the widows. And you will have, even in the New King James Version, they will say defender of the widows. But that's not because they corrupted the text. It's that if you're going to adapt it to how we use the word judge or judgment today, you have a choice. Either stick with the original wording, which now in modern context is going to be taken differently, or use a different word, which would, the semantics of which would correspond to what was originally in the text. Okay, so again, I'm trying to say this makes perfect sense once you adjust for the meaning of the word justice and judgment, as a consequence, etc. And we're going to go now to 1 Corinthians 5. So when St. Paul says in verses 12 and 13, I won't copy this, but he says, "For what have I to do to judge them also that are without? Do not ye judge them that are within." 13, "But them that are without God judgeth. Therefore put away from amongst yourself that wicked person." So this is St. Paul reprimanding the Corinthians for practicing fornication, right? Because we're talking about Corinth. Historically, you had worship of certain deities that part of the ritual was to have orgies, right? So these converts did not adjust for the change that now you shouldn't be doing that anymore. God is not particularly happy with orgies. And he says, God judges those who are without the church, but he says you have the power to judge those within the church. Again, you have a structure in the church that allows for certain people to make decisions, and all of our judgments we will be held accountable for. The smallest of which, even if you're just a parent to a rather misbehaving 5-year-old, how you set that child in order is also going to be taken into account. Because when we analyze the word faith, we're going to find out you're not just going to get away with it with the sinner's prayer or whatever. So that's basically what I wanted to say. Maybe it's best to leave it for people who want to ask questions and call in. I want to see how long it would take me for this basic thing. It would have lasted a bit longer, but unfortunately, because the internet is so gay today, I couldn't write on my whiteboard. I mean, I could, you just couldn't see it. It would be almost playing, it would be gambling to figure out whether you could or couldn't. So can I spank my child? I don't see a problem with it as long as you're not particularly liberal with applying corporal punishment. And I mean, if you do it just to be vengeful, then no. If you do it because you're setting rules, I was spanked plenty as a child, but I always got 2 warnings. I think that's fairly fair of my parents. So word concept fallacy is everywhere, sadly. Yes, Michael of St. Joseph. But it's the stubborn-headedness of people who sort of just want to have this artifact that they can just interface with, and I mean the scriptures, and look at it in this particular way that you can just read it. No. My dad hit me with rings on. Why would your father have rings on other than the wedding ring? Think about it, resident sleeper. Every child needs an Eastern European beating at least once in their lifetime. Yes. So Kunk asks, has the authority been given to us as singular men to cast judgment of disorderly entities or systems? Not particularly, right? So in 1 Corinthians 5, St. Paul is addressing a particular church community and saying, those of you there with authority can judge here. But in other places, St. Paul also says that he does not call for revolution against the Roman Empire, because he says all authority is from God. So he's saying people in power wouldn't be in power unless God allowed it for some reason. And the way to fix that is to be more faithful and to live a godly life. God tolerated Israel for a while, the northern kingdom of Israel for a while, and then even though At best, you were ignorant about how things should work, so you worshipped Yahweh by sacrificing to a golden calf, in Bethel and Dan. So that's the best you could get. But much worse things happened there. And again, not much better. It was better, but not much better in Judah. But God tolerates it and then leaves them over to the Assyrians. But what happens when, before the Babylonians are allowed to take over Judah and Jerusalem, some of them said, God would never allow this to happen to us because we have the temple. God doesn't particularly care about the temple. It has its purpose, but you can't appeal to it as some type of relic, some type of magical item that means you're safe from encroachment of the enemies, irrespective of how you worship God. Although he saves Judah from the Assyrians. Okay? But at the same time, you are not called upon to be some revolutionary. Because first of all, revolutions tend to end up worse than they started with what you started with. So that's one problem of it. Another is that it's a playground for demons. They don't care. Demons don't care if they lead you into madness through either imperial grandeur or through revolutionary madness. The important thing is that you stumble. What if the disorderly system demands to commit a sinful action? Then you refuse and get martyred for it. But, the church is there also, and the people who are given authority within the church will also be judged for what they do with that authority. But I'm afraid you can't get to this individualism. Okay, so abuse is not funny. I mean, I wouldn't call spanking abuse. It's not about it hurting. It's more about showing that there are consequences to actions. So, you don't, cut your children's limbs off. So we might disagree. I don't agree with people like Stefan Molyneux. I think, in fact, the reason why we are in such horrible conditions is that people have not been taught to respect authority and boundaries and expect anything bad to ever happen. It's just, oh, you shouldn't do it. And the people who say, don't spank your child, talk to them. They're trying to discuss ethics with a toddler, which is ridiculous, first of all. But what I think is actually what happens is because it doesn't work to debate, call up Andrew to set up a debate between you and the 4-year-old on the Crucible. Right? Oh, looks like that approach didn't work. They always end up emotional manipulation. I've never had to hit my children. Maybe people can't raise them properly. If that was the case, good, excellent. Some people have very misbehaving children. It depends on a whole lot of things, not the least of which is individual children. I'm not, as I said, don't be liberal with applying corporal punishment. I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's sometimes necessary. But as I said, people then tend to just go, oh, that would make mother very, very sad. You don't want to make mother sad, do you? Right. I'd rather be hit. Thank you very much. Chaz McGooski says, can think of a couple of times I was hit as a kid, but I probably deserved it. Yeah, sometimes maybe the parents are just in a bad mood, but they should make sure if they do something wrong, parents should show remorse for having done something wrong. Make it up to the child. Show that you are just when executing judgment. Okay, goodbye. Okay, goodbye. I suppose. Children would rather be hit than neglected. Absolutely. I don't disagree with the statement children need attention. Of course they do. They need attention, they need instruction, they need guidance, they need love, they need many, many things. If you neglect them and they end up misbehaving, you're just making things worse by saying you have no right to be upset for being neglected. So you're sending the absolute worst message possible. And I would absolutely disagree with that. People are so bloody soft nowadays. They would threaten to go up the garden and get a sally rod, and that was enough to stop any nonsense. Yes, most of the time I was, I was stopped by threats, not by execution. If you love your children, you will discipline them. Yes, spare the rod, spoil the child. That's probably Aristotle or someone, Nicomachean ethics and all. Baby visit is due in less than a week. Well, thank God, Andrew. So God bless you. God bless the wife. Pray for all the best and hope it goes extremely well. That's excellent news. Every time I do one of these streams, I get some excellent news. Andrew and I spanked, but it was only required a few times because we are very consistent and our kids knew we were serious. It's not abuse in the proper context. Yes, you can't just go off of empty threats. The idea is even, just pull on their hair a bit. The idea is that they should know there can be consequences. It's not about vengeance. You have no right to take vengeance on children. God. 10 burpees for disobedience. Okay, that's glorious. Okay, before we get too far into anything else, I will post the invite link. Beat your kids so they don't beat you, Gandhi, probably. Hello, Justin Merck. Right, I won't make the same mistake. I will pin the invite link. We're only an hour in. Right. This here. Oh, goodness. I still don't understand what's wrong with the bloody internet. And I'm probably making it worse now. Okay, here we are. Pin message. There we go. Okay, people. Adeste fideles, leti triumphantes. Venite, venite in Bethlehem. Adeste fideles, leti triumphantes. So hopefully you stick with the topic, at least in the beginning. So if you have other questions, unrelated questions, let's try and keep that for later. Because I wouldn't like to, mangle everything, and have an inconsistent flow. See, Athanasius, I told you I was advancing in my technological knowledge, mastering the techne. Okay, just curious. Wait, if a totalitarian person or persons projects unjustified force and are clearly in the wrong, we are to just let them kill us instead of hold them accountable, defend. No one says don't defend. We're saying revolution tends to be worse than it starts out, right? So it's not, the choices aren't either allow the worst things to happen to you or slaughter everyone you deem to be worthy of condemnation and judgment. That's not the dichotomy we're dealing with. And again, we should deal also with the idea that sin is derived from demons. So people who do all sorts of nasty things, they do it because they're tricked. Ultimately, humans are good, but fall into deception from these entities. And that's how they end up debasing themselves, becoming more like them. But that is something to be healed in the same way that, you can say, oh, I would have killed Saul while he was persecuting Christians. Turns out, best evangelist in history. So that's a very difficult line to tread. It's very easy to be, rah, rah, rah in either direction. I would never even slap someone, even if they were raping 5 people a day. Or, saying I would kill anyone who looks at people funny. Okay, sorry for the rant, Kunk. Go ahead.
That's all right. It's funny. I think you're kind of on topic of what I wanted to ask you, but I'm not for sure. I missed about a minute when I was in the studio. Are you talking about judgment still?
So someone asked, are we then to just deal with any injustice, by a dictator or totalitarian people?
Okay, well, that parallels my inquiry as well. I know it's a little bit off topic because you were kind of into word concept policies and just how that could be manipulated or misconstrued. But it is, if you don't mind, I would like to ask you a little bit more about how we do carry ourselves with disorderly systems or people or jurisdictional systems or, even, I guess, religions as well. I guess, if you don't mind. Yeah. Well, I just, all right. Well, it's always been a very interesting topic for me, trying to actually figure out who has the authority in this place. And I know, like, you're very biblically strong person and have the background. And I know there's Romans and there's, Paul mentions how we are to deal with, I guess, the jurisdictional systems of our day. But for me, and a lot of people, there seems to be two different worlds that have split kind of in a way where that system has become disorderly, very disorderly. And I understand the idea of God deeming that system to be there for people who choose to participate in it. But there is also another type of people who choose not to participate in it, and that interaction between the enforcement of these disorderly systems onto the populace and the people and our cultures and how we are geopolitical, everything. Their enforcement is now encroaching on a lot of the freedoms of people who do not want to participate and are getting fed up with that amount of controlling apparatus that they're putting into our civilizations. I was wondering, just if we are on this subject of judgment, what do we do? I used your first answer to my inquiry was non-participation, which just deny if they were to say you must do this for whatever reason. We won't give any examples, so you can stay on YouTube. But you can't just back up and just say no a lot of times. So when does the judgment reversed on the disorderly systems, and when is it justified to do so? Is basically what I'm trying to say.
Well, there is no general answer. There is no answer in toto, right? Because you can imagine probably the worst it gets is the Roman Empire. I would argue worse than communism.
We're getting there.
I come from a former communist country. But I don't know. The Romans were rather talented at torturing people publicly. So they made spectacles out of it. But you could have that happen to you for refusing to burn a bit of incense for the emperor, or actually for the genius of the emperor, right? If you've heard me on Jim Bob's stream, a genius is a spirit. So you're to sacrifice to the emperor, basically, Otherwise, that's civil disobedience. That's revolution. That means you're under their system. You're not recognizing the authority of the emperor. That might as well be, you know, I don't know, like refusing, resisting arrest or something. But worse, it's this massive system that depends on this one person being a deity, basically. So even that could end you in a horrible position, you know, taken, you know, hanged upside down with your legs spread and then sawn in half publicly.
Thank you.
All
right.
Yeah. So, you know, the vax mandates weren't that bad.
No. Well, I would just like to inject real quick. I think the torture has gone metaphysical. So I don't know what their suicide rates were back there or what they did with their genitalia. But it is comparable to torture, in my view, if we were going to you know, compare the two different types of ruling class and how they torment their people. But it just perhaps isn't so visible or physical. But yeah, I get your point.
I'd really advise against trying to say it's as bad as it was. It's not. It's just not. Romans, because justice is order. You know, when someone revolts, they'll quell it and then just pick up random people off the streets and crucify them in front of entrances to the city, or raise the entire city totally, as happened with Jerusalem in 70 AD. So again, I don't like the idea to develop a victim mentality. Yes, things are bad. I'm not saying they're not bad now. I'm saying it's preferable to being, you know, tortured, randomly selected to be crucified and left there to hang, you know, as a warning to others who might refuse. It's still oppressive, but that's what you got back then for lack of participation. But
how did that stop, Posh? How did that go? What happened to this power that they had, and the ability and the authority they had, I presume, to do the torture? How was that dissipated?
By Emperor Constantine.
One man.
In the Roman Empire, yes. The Edict of Milan in 313 basically forbade the persecution of not just Christians. Other groups were also emancipated, but also a lot of, you know, real estate was given back to Christians and stuff. But ultimately, it's basically Emperor Constantine that forbade all sorts of things, gladiatorial combat. You know, he didn't allow for slaves to be marked in anywhere except their feet, because they usually would be on the face, because you don't want to put it somewhere where it can be covered up. But he said specifically because men are made in the image of God, it's an insult to God and Christ to brand them on the face.
That's right? Did he wave his hand in the air and then it just stopped, or was there a physical interaction?
He issues decrees.
Decrees, yeah.
Yeah.
Who enforced them?
The administration. The imperial power is uncontested in pagan societies. So he basically destroyed the entire system when he refused to go and sacrifice after his coronation. He refused to go and sacrifice to Jupiter, which everyone had to do, right? Mm-hmm. Even back in the Republic, that it wasn't an emperor, obviously, but you know, Caesar or someone would have to. So that's not happening. Also, he refused to do any sacrifices, animal sacrifices, which an emperor was supposed to do, because an emperor was also the high priest, the highest priest at least, right? The Pontifex Maximus and stuff. But he still is the emperor. And when he starts doing things, people start following, because in their mind, that is what you do with the emperor. You know, you don't have this idea, oh yeah, but the legitimacy of government and, you know, taxation without representation. Nope. That guy, that's the emperor. You do what he says. With Christianity, you have the advent of a law higher than the emperor himself. the justice of God, that the emperor has to submit to God specifically, right? Not, cavort with all sorts of deities for all sorts of reasons. If you want blessing for war, go to Mars, Ares, or, whichever type of war god you have. But that's basically how it stopped. The Edict of Milan that's why it's a massively celebrated point in history for Christianity, because that's when it stopped. Because if the emperor forbids it, you have to stop. I mean, people can disobey. Not a very smart idea to disobey the emperor. But that's simply how the system worked. And that's how it also collapsed, ironically, and became Christian. From the head down.
Okay. I think I have a little bit of different view on how things shift and times and cycles. And there are, of course, the head bosses that get together and they get their names written in the history books as well. But I'm just under some assumption that there is a power in the people, in the minds of the people, and the hearts of the men that actually carry out these transitions through the cycles in time. But I believe that there's also under a law, it's under God's law, and apparently, God's authority can be picked up and taken by somebody else, and then mandated across the lands as an emperor. But it just seems to me like
what do you mean by picked up?
Well, it seems to me like it would be almost a shift in the consciousness of the people that would allow a transition of a dystopia to have you called it a revolution or a revelation, to move towards something more adequate for people, culture, and the future. It seems to me like it would be more than just one individual with the righteous staff.
It's not. I gave you a response as to how it actually changed. I'm not saying there weren't all sorts of things that preceded it. Obviously, there were. One of the biggest was the martyrs, because a lot of people converted. Romans had this fascination with very stringent fasts. Because there wasn't there's no religion of Rome. That's again a very Christian innovation.
But they were the ultimate ecumenists, don't you think? The Romans.
Yeah, but exactly. They even donated to building of synagogues and churches, even as pagans, because to them that's simply what a good pious person would do.
Sounds very disorderly.
Sorry.
Sounds very disorderly, given enough.
But yes,
centuries.
But because they don't have we tend to think of Roman religion as this very ordered, thing. They have their Roman pagan Bible thing, and you can go and read it and find out how things work. That's not how it worked at all. But that's also part of why it was so unstable. Julian the Apostate, who I think was the nephew of Constantine, tried to bring back the old thing, but sort of have it codified, and no one knew what to do with it, because you lived paganism by living it, right? You can't codify it outside of certain groups in certain places. That's a very big topic. But as I said, it was sort of set up in a way that once the emperor converted, you're gone. Your system doesn't work, because your system also relies on having the emperor sacrifice to the gods. It's similar to think of how Catholics have a problem when the Pope says something rather un-Catholic. What do you do?
Every other day. Yeah.
Nowadays, every other day.
Denial.
But you either go into denial or you go for a correction. Some people just give up on the entire thing.
It was the same with your moon analogy. You just kind of.
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Infallible, yes.
Infallibly fallible. Infallibly heretical. So, John Hoffman, I see you back in the background, but it says devices not connected, and I cannot add you. It says they will need to connect their mic/cam before you can add them to the stream. So, I'm not sure what you need to do. Matthew, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Hello, Matthew.
as opposed to my internet doing rather well.
Well, it's weird because I've noticed Kunk's video has not been choppy. It just seems to be your video, but your audio has been fine. So it doesn't. I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do. I know it wasn't a problem last time, so who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
Rats chewing on the cables. Yeah.
So on the subject of Sola Scriptura, I was actually going through an Orthodox study Bible, and I was surprised that the New Testament version is a New King James version, which basically just like that. There's no more than the 27 writings. And I was just wondering what the Orthodox position on the authority, even if it's not the final authority, would the Orthodox council or would the bishops, would they refer to Scripture for a disagreement, or do they have some type of outside source to go to?
It would be both. No shortage of quotations of scriptures with church fathers and councils, etc. No shortage of it.
Yeah, because Athanasius actually said in the 27 writings alone, the teachings of godliness is preached. And as far as I've read, like I believe Athanasius is seen as one of the, I guess the
chief theologian of the Council of Nicaea.
Yes, yeah, but very, very important to the Orthodox Church. So I guess what my question is, what level of authority do the Scriptures have? If there is a disagreement, do they go back to the Scriptures, or do they have some person that is allowed to give the final judgment?
Right. So when you if you remember the term apophaticism, the Church, the Orthodox Church at least, tends to deal with things apophatically. That is to say, sort of pushing away wrong things, not exactly making affirmative statements. Very rarely does the Orthodox Church make affirmative dogmatic statements, because that's, when you mention Saint Athanasius the Great, he was battling the heresy of Arianism, which had a very distorted view of Christology. Right? It's not Unitarianism as we see it today, but it really messes up Christology and the Trinity. So, of course, he quotes a lot of Scripture, but when the Church also deals with things, it follows tradition. So you can go, when a Unitarian shows up and says something like, "Oh, the Trinity was invented in Nicaea," we can go to Church Fathers prior to Nicaea and show that no, the Trinity might have been phrased differently, like maybe not the term Trinity itself was used, but they obviously teach the same thing. So that's how you know, because the Church is given, and then we say we are maintaining the deposit of faith, right? The faith once delivered. So you have it, you get it with the apostles. They establish all of these churches with people put in authority, and then they maintain it. So that is it's not that you can just point to a quote and say, okay, this is enough. It simply doesn't work that way, which is the problem with Sola Scriptura, right? You need both. And we wouldn't even call them like separate things. One, the scriptures here, tradition here. It's simply, we get the scriptures as part of tradition, and they're interpreted with the teachings of the apostles, and then you get the apostolic fathers, as we call them. These are like the first generation after the apostles, right? Saint Polycarp was taught by Saint John, and Saint Polycarp taught Saint Irenaeus of Lyon. Right, so we read them as basically like the spiritual father, son, and grandson, of Saint John the Evangelist. So it's not that the scriptures we would disagree or say they're unimportant. It's that it's very easy to just pick up the book and get something wrong, and then just say, well, I read it in this book, and it obviously says that, so you should interpret it in such a manner.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but it would, to me, like when people would ask me, like, well, why you can't, you can't verify, or you can't, I guess, justify the authority of the scripture with the scripture. I mean, the argument for that would be that the scriptures are divinely inspired, that they come from God, and that He is the authority, and that there's no, that it was really the Holy Spirit. It wasn't so. I mean, yes, obviously the apostles wrote down the books and all that, but the authority, the real authority behind it all was the Holy Spirit working through them. So if they had a disagreement, like let's just say specifically about a doctrine, like the doctrine of faith or the doctrine of grace, or the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, they would have to refer back to the scriptures, right? For like what is and what isn't applicable.
Yes, ultimately you do, but you also go with, okay, how has the church interpreted this throughout time? Because if you have this continuous understanding of how the doctrine of faith is understood, and then that keeps playing out, and then all of a sudden you get this different view, that sort of doesn't make sense, right? I understand people, you can say that there was people call it a blackout, the great apostasy or whatever, right? You had the church, and then the apostles died, and then you didn't have it until, the Reformation or something. People make that claim, but that also would go against the scripture that the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church.
Hey, can I jump in here real quick? All right.
Yep.
I want to add something, maybe a little bit to Matthew's inquiry as well. I mean, I don't understand it completely, but it sounds pretty simple that there has to be somebody with the most Holy Spirit mojo. There has to be somebody that's top of the game, got the most stats, won the most battles, writ it all down, and got a pretty good lineup for if there's any situations when Unitarians come and shit like that. So it's really not that complicated. You don't have to overthink it. Actually, it just makes sense. Like if you applied it with any system, that the guy who's been around the longest and knows the most stuff and has gone through the most stuff is good. I have another question though. Perhaps what do the apostles say, and what do the bishops say in the Orthodox Church about something a little less, I would like the introduction to AI and our modern day technocracy? Like you say, well, we don't let stuff in, we just push out the bad. There's these new elements, I guess, that we're all experiencing that I don't believe were ever experienced before. Like, how does the church adapt and conquer and sift through what's right and wrong whenever we're introduced with these new texts that are hitting our civilizations?
Well, as tends to be the case, a problem arises.
Yes.
And the church struggles with the problem. Ultimately, something comes out on top. And since we're still in the idea of Nicaea and Athanasius, you had the Arian crisis. It gripped most of the church. And then you have God raises up someone, and that person ultimately comes out on top. The reason you don't have things like, for example, Saint Athanasius just starts flying, gets these golden wings behind him and just shouts something, and then everyone obeys, is the same reason why God hasn't destroyed the world yet, right? People are given a chance to repent, to interpret. God is very patient with us, and we should be very thankful for that. But God raises up people in difficult times. This cannot just have one line going through it, and you follow that singular line, outside of just saying the church, but I mean individuals God raises up. And Matthew, when you say the scriptures come from the Holy Spirit, I mentioned this in the Orthodox understanding of good and evil. No good isn't from God, ultimately. So if we wouldn't say that Saint Athanasius has this autonomy outside of the Holy Spirit or something. He is not a generator of good or evil. The Holy Spirit can do things through the church. He can do things through individuals, through councils, through all sorts of departed saints, if you will. All of these things are under the purview, in the toolbox, so to speak, of God. There is no reason to impose this hard-line distinction, because it ends up, again, just looping things. When Unitarians say, who is good but God alone, quote that saying of Christ, there is no way to convince them of it meaning otherwise. You can try and bring up, Christ could forgive sins, and they wanted to stone him for it, because that means, are you claiming to have the power to forgive sins? Only God can forgive sins, so you're claiming you're God. You want to stone him, right? And we, all of us here, I assume, would agree that Christ is God, and therefore that's not a problem for us. But they would say, well, why can't God give him the ability to forgive sins, just delegate it for a while, the way we wouldn't say Moses split the sea of his own power, right? It was obviously God working through him. Am I making more sense?
Yeah.
I'm gonna jump off. I'll let you guys carry out the solo wars.
Thank you for calling in. God bless.
Yes, thank you, Bosch.
I guess like what I'm kind of just hung up on is I still don't see a higher authority. If we're talking about apostolic succession, I don't, and we're saying, and we're going to, I guess, both admit that the New Testament, or the new King James Version, or whatever, is the 27 writings of the apostles. I don't understand, if from a argument of apostolic succession, how those are not considered the highest level of authority. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what our definition of Sola Scriptura is, but if it's like it is the final authority, then that to me seems synonymous with apostolic succession, because it comes from the apostles. Now, I'm not going to go into this, but I did bring up earlier how they've made Constantine equal to the apostles, and they've made other saints equal to the apostles, which to me is kind of a wild claim, because the apostles seem to be those that directly followed Christ, that witnessed his death and resurrection, with the exception of Paul, who was by the will of God, who was still shown the death and resurrection of Christ. But but Paul is pretty much the only outside apostle that didn't directly follow Christ. That wasn't like one of the 12. And I'm gonna hop off, Posh, but I appreciate you, man.
Okay. Thank you for calling in. I'll respond to this quickly, and if you're going to listen from the chat, I'll wait a moment or so to start answering.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so the word, even apostle, means one's sent out. I can't remember the exact Hebrew word it derives its meaning from, but it literally means like an ambassador, and an ambassador in this context would mean, though he represents Christ in this particular region, or he has the authority, so it might as well be Christ there. That's what the meaning of the word is. And when we read in Timothy, by the way, none of us disagree on the New Testament. That's not the disagreement with the canon. And yes, the Orthodox Study Bible is based on the New King James Version. But when we read about the laying of hands, and people, and Saint Timothy is warned, be careful whom you lay your hands on after you. That is this inherited thing. The way the Levites were, the Levites had this blood line. There's this spiritual heritage, spiritual succession now in the New Testament. But these bishops have certain authorities. They can't just proclaim things, because they also interact with other bishops. That's why we get the councils. That's what we get in Acts 15. This is all of these factors interact with each other, And it's simply not that there is this one thing that can do things autonomously, be it the scriptures, be it a single bishop, or whatever. All of these things interact with each other. They're interwoven. And that is how the church operates. And sometimes it takes a while for the truth to break through, but then you can still follow it, right? And that's why you get the problem of Sola Scriptura. It depends also how you read it, etc. Thank you, brother. God bless. Matthew is really joyful. Glad that this is how we're working. And God bless you too as well. And thank you for calling in. So,
And Posh,
John
I have a
Hoffman,
question for you.
Go ahead.
Oh, forgive me. Even thinking about how you're describing authority, it seems like to call a text the primary authority, the pinnacle of authority. Usually, authorities are people, persons, not text to be interpreted by persons. Because eventually, like you've said, like Jim Bob has talked about, someone has to be reading, understanding that text, and ultimately they are the authority in what is being said. Could you speak to that a little bit, just so because I'm trying to flush that out, at least in terms of how to communicate with Joyful, Matthew, or anybody else in that realm?
Yes. So very quickly, texts. There's even an Egyptian story of a pharaoh sort of being concerned that Thoth, the god of magic and writing and stuff, invented writing, because how will people who cannot who do not have the wisdom and guidance, they can misinterpret this. So this isn't a new phenomenon. People were aware of this problem a long time ago. And if you study languages, you understand how quickly things can go awry, from very small things to just massive changes in the semantic nuances within words. Like today I focused on the word justice, right? And I gave the idea that how we use justice today makes absolutely no sense in Isaiah 1:17 when it says, "Judge the fatherless."
Mm-hmm.
But it makes perfect sense if you account for the fact how it was used in ye olden times. So a text in and of itself is read and rather written in a certain context, historical, geographical. It could even be just the level of education of a person, how big their vocabulary is. I'm not talking about scriptures now, I'm talking in general, right? So when you have all of these things factoring in, you're going to need a continuum of knowledge. Same as a type of apprenticeship, okay? So that's why a text cannot have authority, because you and I can read the same text. Just recently, I was in a comment debate with people who are Roman Catholic about original sin, and their proof texts, I read them. I read Orthodox theology. They read it. They read Catholic theology, and this isn't even the scriptures, because the way you use words, you account for that historically and geographically. In this part of the empire, this word was used in this way, or in this culture, like I talk about how women are called to be sons of God. Why? Because in that particular culture, only the son can inherit things. Nowadays, that's not the case.
No, that means you can be trans. That just means you can be trans.
A mother hen.
Sola Scriptura, Josh. You can be trans.
Okay, so women are called to be sons because implicit in that word for the people at the time is that now they can partake of the inheritance. And the firstborn son inherits everything, and then his duty is to divvy up things among his brothers. His sisters would be married off into other families. The first begotten of God is Christ. He gets all authority and then divvies it up amongst his brothers. And then if you change it to children, it would lose the context it had in a historic sense. But if it was written today, there would be no need to specify a son, and children would suffice. But that is the sort of the problem you deal with, okay? And if you, author Eric jests, but there are literally people who take that as approving of transgenderism or something. Yesterday, Jim Bob had a stream, and this pastor said that, drag is holy because Christ said he is like a mother hen. When he says, "Oh Israel, how I would have gathered you under my wings as a hen does her chicks." Therefore, drag good. So we can joke about it and exaggerate. These people actually exist and actually claim this thing with authority because they get it from the scriptures. That's the problem.
One thing I've really noticed is that, especially with the Sola Scriptura crowd, is that they function a lot of times off of the word concept fallacy, where, say, the word God, J-Dyer uses this all the time, the word God can only mean one thing, when in reality it may have like 7 or 8 different meanings, depending on context and how it's used.
But this is how things play out. Because Christianity becomes dominant, we only say God for the Lord, creator of heaven and earth.
Trinity, yeah.
But then you read back into history and sort of think, oh no, they had multiple gods and things. The Bible wouldn't say multiple gods. No, it's because you, through practice, you lost all the other meanings of the word in life, in your lived experience. You just don't call anyone but the Holy Trinity God.
Right. And what gives Scripture context, though? History and what else? Tradition, which Protestants don't typically have, unless maybe you're a high Anglican or something.
Yeah, basically.
You're not going to have that. So anyway, I got to go. Thanks.
Where you have really autistic theological background like Calvinists do.
God.
There's this one guy that goes through the Bible every year. It's one of the only things I got out of being a Protestant. He went through Jules Vernon, or no, that's the author. Forget his name. Vernon McGee is his name, but he goes through. Father Stephen DeYoung is trying to do his version of it, so we'll have an Orthodox equivalent. But he's going through every single verse of the Bible.
Father Stephen DeYoung is an Orthodox equivalent.
Huh?
Father Stephen DeYoung is an Orthodox equivalent.
Yeah.
Did you say that? Maybe I missed.
Oh, yeah. I'm using my phone mic, so it's probably cutting in and out.
Maybe
no, he's trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, okay.
Hello, I'm first time here. Can I speak something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
What's his name?
Yeah, I will.
Boris.
Yeah, thank you. I think I wanted just. I noticed he is appearing and disappearing occasionally.
You cut out for a bit. Repeat, if you would.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, I wanted just to say to that guy Matthew, he's appearing sometimes, and I noticed that he don't understand. Not that I am expert. I'm not expert at all. That Orthodox actually type how church is functioning. Basically, but one good analog for functioning Orthodox church or churches is Bitcoin. Basically, in the history and now also and through history, when something's new pop up, basically all churches, theoretically, all churches are discussing, is that according with the scripture? All traditional churches. And like in Bitcoin, if someone pop up with, I don't know, $1 million in Bitcoins, all other nodes of that Bitcoin net would say, no, this is not legit because there is no succession in that origin of Bitcoin. That's like Orthodox churches. It's a very robust system. It's hard to break that system. And for example, in that analog, if you think about Protestant churches, they appeared in 500s and then from nowhere, and that's why we Orthodox know it's not legit. But some older churches and so on and so on. I'm not really expert in this. You guys do good things. I'm really proud of you, Red Poshnek, because you are my from the same country, almost same country. I'm from Bosnia, but I lived in Serbia. Now I'm in Canada, and I just wish you all the best. And I would like that guy Matthew eventually figure out how Orthodox Church is doing, and I recommend him just to go in some Orthodox Church and try to go further. And I think he's a good guy, and eventually he's gonna catch up. That's all for me, and God bless you.
Well, God bless you too. Bog te blagoslovio. So we hope the same for Matthew. He started off in Jim Bob's streams very rough. He has become much better. We communicate much better, and we're getting points across properly. So so I'm very happy, and thank God for that. So
and thanks
thank
God.
you,
I occasionally follow up your program, and I notice some progress to that in that guy, and he's really what we would say a good soul, dobra dusha, and I wish him the best in that journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry for this interruption and for this everything.
No.
So this is my first time just jumping in. God bless you, and I'm continue to watching your program, but now I'm just leaving. I don't want to interrupt with my stupid things. Anyway, God bless you guys.
No. Thank you for calling in. You're always welcome to call in, and God bless you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Goodbye. Okay.
Gotta love the. This is like an old phone chat. It's like we're in a rural Serbia, and we all connected our phones together, and we're just talking on the phone. Ludmila, put the phone down.
Like a dial-up, you know. So
Yeah.
you can't use the landline if you're on the internet.
Right.
You know, someone's other family members connecting when all of a sudden it just cuts out, and they're just like, "What's going on?"
Yeah, and then you hear an angry parent marching in, hand in slap position.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I have to commend you for your profile picture. So you know him probably as Justin Popovic. I know him as Justin Popovic or Justin Čeliški.
Čeliški. Is that the monastery he
yes,
was at?
Čelije or Kelije. But you know, it's very, very, very rare to refer to a monastic by their surname.
Right.
But sometimes there's too many, you know, St. John's to account for it simply by geography.
Right.
But yes, he's also known here as Justin Popovic.
Yeah, his writings are fantastic.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how we were hoping. So me and my family were in Romania for the last 3 months, and we were hoping to go to Serbia to see Elder Thaddeus's grave, as well as potentially Father Justine's, but it just didn't work out. There was just too much going on, and we were all over the Moldovan region of Romania, so we couldn't make it all the way down to the southeast. However, I did consider calling into Jim Bob's with white lace curtains behind me with a British accent, if only to just be like, it's not just a Serbian thing, it's all over Romania too.
It's an Eastern European thing.
Yes.
It's very common. So it's so funny to me that people are, you know, shocked by it or find it, you know, interesting and peculiar when it's so bloody common here.
I know.
I said in this floor alone, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 big ones, and then smaller ones also. But again, it's so funny.
Same with my wife's parents' house and now our house. We got back, and I'm just like, oh gosh, we didn't really leave. We can't see a lot of stuff outside, but that means a lot of people can't see inside either. So that's, from what I understand, the point.
You know, you can make a good joke out of getting sunglasses or something like that, some type of spectacles, with like laced
Oh my gosh.
patterns on them, and then say, well, the eyes are the window to the soul, and I'm Eastern European.
Oh my gosh. You'd have to have the shirt combo
couldn't
with
see
that
anything,
written
but-
out. The shirt combo with it written describing like what's going on, because the Americans are just like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? Oh gosh.
Well, you had a good plan. I have to commend you for that.
Yeah, it just lack of execution. It was just like, yeah, two kids. Jim Bob's streams were at basically midnight, or I think it was like 10 or 10:30 at night, and I was like, this isn't going to happen. So, I did have a comment to make, unless John wants to jump in. I know he's been on a little bit longer than I have. No? Okay. Matthew was kind of intrigued by the similarities in the New Testament, but I'm sure you know, Posh, the minutia that goes into what does that actually mean, because when you get into manuscript traditions, you get book translations like the ESV or the NIV that start changing not only words but actually removing particular phrases. Like I forget, what is it? Is it Matthew 17? 21, where it says, however, this kind of demon does not come out except by prayer and fasting. You won't find that in the ESV. You won't find that in the NIV. So a lot of people don't actually have exposure to that verse unless they're in a church that a Protestant church that exclusively uses the New King James. So
I didn't know that, actually. I didn't know they would. I assume people who are. I mean, obviously, Christ just says, "Get out," but the apostles couldn't. But I can see why some people would remove things, because it's incongruent with the rest of the New Testament, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you also have the Johannine comma controversy, because it wasn't there in the original. You also have the issue that, which really messes up a lot of people. That originally, in the oldest manuscripts we have, the number of the beast is 616.
Interesting.
So that just ruins the lives of a lot of these gematria or gematria adjacent people. So that's also again the problem: manuscript traditions.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. Yeah. A friend who does the translations, he's Orthodox, and he was trying to do the Septuagint, or encouraging a Protestant company, because I mean, who doesn't need another translation of the scriptures? For whatever reason, they just keep doing them. But he was like really encouraging, like, hey, I know we're doing the Old Testament based on the Masoretic text. Why don't we do a little one on the Septuagint as well, just to get an idea of the kind of differences? And they were intrigued. There was an issue that happened with the owner who reposed, and so the project ended. But he was working on that, and he was like, yeah, the whole Sola Scriptura thing only works if you have one specific text and it stays consistent throughout the entire tradition, from east to west, the entire time, with no changes. At that point, you then get people with different translations, and thus not the quote unquote correct scripture. And then how can it be the sole authority? Which I know I mentioned earlier. It seems like people have authority, but how do you get a sole authority if you don't know which is which? And especially pre-modern times, the idea of running across someone in England when you're in Syria and being like, "Oh, your translation is different. We should get this figured out," is like, it's non-existent. So
also, a lot of languages have words that simply lack a word with a one-to-one correspondence as far as their meanings go. A lot of words have a lot of baggage, as far as I said, words derive meaning from usage. You don't have this somewhat ontologically self-subsistent word, except for the logos. And then you sort of, it emanates meaning from itself. That's not how it works.
Right.
That's why I said Savage Memes, Volume 5, available for pre-order.
Good plug.
I know. I hope, at least. savage. We have an understanding of the word savage, but then you can sort of see how it can translate, pun intended, to meaning like a very good joke, like one that really hits the other person. You can understand how it develops, but a savage or something being savage does not usually mean, a spicy joke.
Right. It just happens to work in this instance, and if it takes root, it grows into its own thing, and yeah.
So well, there's two of you there. I'll go to the loo and be right back.
Oh, okay.
You can interact amongst each other.
We'll
Don't start any heresies while I'm gone.
You good Americans, then we'll filibuster.
Yes, I've heard that the filibuster is there to protect white supremacy. So.
Of course.
The Senate filibuster, at least. I'll be right back.
Everything American is meant to support white supremacy.
Sola filibuster.
Yes.
I'll be right back.
So, John, what's going on in your ways?
A lot. I'm on the old calendar, so thank goodness I'm not my fast. I'm in Rocor, so the fast hasn't begun yet. So I'm still enjoying my butter and steaks.
You're obviously rubbing it in because we're new calendar, so this is really tough to hear.
I'm sorry. Today's the second day of the fast. It's hard. I forget how strict the Dormition fast is. Like, is it most days food with oil?
No, it's like Lent.
Oh, that's right. It is.
Yeah,
it
it's equally strict as Lent. And from what I understand, it was actually as long as Lent at one point. And then they're like, yeah, we're gonna change that a little bit just to really try to put the emphasis back onto the Lenten experience and also give people a break between Lent. And so that's where the Apostles' Fast came in. So, yeah. But yes, Rocor, that's actually my friend who does the translations. He's in Rocor, and his bishop just gave him a blessing to try to start a project related to a translation that is meant for the Orthodox, as opposed to strictly doing what the Orthodox Study Bible did, which was take the bones of the NKJV and then make slight changes here and there to update it to address basically Orthodox theology. So, I'm not sure how far it will go because there's not a lot of legs in translation work in Orthodox countries because we've got a ton of. For example, Romania, they've got a Romanian translation. They use it. The Russians have it. The Serbians, they've got it. They don't need more. Although
it's really funny. My friend, I have a lot of where I live. There's a lot of Russian Protestants. I don't know why. They just all decided to move to my city. And even the Russian Baptists use the Sabor. They use the Russian the Sabor's translation. They use the Patriarch's the Moscow Patriarch translation in their churches. So they don't even have the same canon as American Baptists. they use
Emperor Peter the Great alone, Peter the Great version of. I completely forgot that I could, show these comments. So I want to say, D. Sim says, justice just is. God is. Divine simplicity confirmed. Get wrecked. Well done. Well done.
Catholic politics.
So you started talking about. Did you mention how much translation is being done in the Orthodox world?
Yeah, my friend he's in the Rocor archdiocese, and his bishop just gave him a blessing to do a translation, to work on a translation that could be basically from the traditional Orthodox approach, as opposed to taking the bones of a Protestant translation and then updating it to address Orthodox theology and Orthodox praxis. So
the entire Bible.
Yeah.
That's massive.
Yeah, and I'm curious because I know if I'm not mistaken, I believe the Russian Old Testament canon is actually broader than so I'm wondering if that's included within that that project. I haven't got a chance to talk to him yet, but
the Slavic approach is if you got it, you translate it.
right.
We've received and we've translated.
Right.
Because a lot of it is just a slightly different version, and you translate both because you got both. Translate both.
Right. And as we know, Russians are just imperialists who want to take over the West. So Rokor, of course, will want to just dominate everybody and take over and make it Russia 2.0 in America.
Yes, and Stalin.
Stalin.
And he's Russian. He's Georgian, but he's Russian.
He's a Gruzian. People forget that.
No, he's from Georgia. He's just this little town north of Atlanta.
Oh yeah, that's Georgia.
Yeah. See.
Oh, the cowboy hat. I can see
Stalin
that.
is Georgian. Georgia is in the United States.
Of course,
Stalin is American. Well, it was. There you go.
I've translated it. You've translated it. You have the sole authority of that text. Victory.
I know.
I can actually picture Stalin in my head with a cowboy hat. That's pretty funny looking. But anyway, yeah. So that's what we were chatting about while you were gone, as well as the fact that you at Posh, as well as John, are on the old calendar, whereas I'm on the new calendar, and so the fast for the Dormition, I think it actually started today. I hope it started today, or else I already broke the fast yesterday. I think it's August 1 is the first day of the fast.
I believe so.
Yeah. So, yeah, John's enjoying all the butter he could. By the way, Posh, if Serbian food is anything like Romanian food, you guys have the best food in the world. It's
I
amazing.
know what Romanian food is like.
Oh gosh. So here's a breakfast.
Okay.
Sliced tomatoes, maybe some salami, bread, soft white cheese, that sort of thing. And it was flavorful. You come to America, you taste stuff, and you're just like, you come back and you're like, there's too much sugar in everything.
Yes, I've been told that. Another thing that's very important. By the way, when I found out that the bread in America is sweet, I wanted things nuked, but
Don't blame you.
what? Could you repeat that, Hoffman?
Oh, I said I don't blame you.
Oh,
About
okay. Yeah. But another thing that happens is that people who move abroad, to work in richer countries, which is something that actually Romania has a worse situation with because they're in the EU.
Yes.
But people who go to even places like Germany, who you would think of like they have a green thumb and everything, they can't wait to go back to Serbia. This is probably true also in Romania.
Yep.
But they eat tomatoes or tomatoes, and they say this tastes great here. It tastes like eating wax over there. So something is going on. By the way, in Serbia, it's still illegal to sell GMOs, which is probably a huge reason for why everything still has taste, and you don't have to add, like a pint of corn syrup to everything you eat. And it's just, I find it so strange, Just a couple of weeks ago, a friend who is from Germany came here and was shocked at the taste of vegetables. But I suppose we're backwards. Our food has taste.
Yeah, it was a distinct letdown going there, and then all of a sudden coming back and just being like, this, like you said, the tomatoes in particular, they don't have any taste. I think it does probably have something to do with like I feel like Serbia and Romania similarly are in a situation where they have to eat food in season. Not necessarily that they choose to, although they do choose to. But you don't get as much like, oh, here's watermelon all year round. You want a watermelon in December? Sure, here you go. You don't really see that.
You can get it, but it becomes so much more expensive that it just doesn't pay off unless you're pregnant or something and have cravings. So it's worth the investment. But otherwise, no. Watermelon and melon. You just eat it in the summer.
Right.
You don't go around seeking it, because you can probably get something with a face and probably organs inside. But okay, GMOs for the win.
It's less expensive, so
yeah,
that's what's
which
really
means it's good.
Yes, which means it's good. Yeah. Oy.
This is a deeply theological topic.
It's about stewardship. It's all the way back to Genesis 1.
Which is part of what you do with authority, which is part of setting things in order, which is judgment. So
GMOs
we
are
tied
the
it back in.
GMOs are the Antichrist.
Yes.
Or a smaller A Antichrist.
Yes. St. John's epistles would approve.
Mm-hmm.
So, would you guys like to discuss theological topics, or should we have more banter? Because we're only 2 hours in.
Let's get the stream back on track.
Go ahead.
It's interesting. You have to read the pre-communion prayers. And one of the lines in the ode to Sweetest Jesus, or the canon to Jesus, is may I be saved by your judgment, O merciful God. We talk about being saved by Christ's judgment. So that's just another interesting use of the word.
Excellent point. Yes, because there's you shall sit on 12 pillars judging the 12 tribes of Israel, and I tend to ask these both people who take God's sovereignty, up all the way up to just complete monergism, and say, God does everything. Okay, we don't say you can usurp God's sovereignty. We're saying God distributes authority because he can and he wants to, which is a big thing. Want to is very different from has to, because he is of this nature, so he just has to. He is this machine, with certain properties, so it gives certain output. No, God gives authority both to angels and to humans. Ye shall judge the angels is what Christ says. So what does that mean, right? You can, I suppose, take it to mean you shall judge the fallen angels, but it's not specified. So then you sort of correct with your understanding of the word judge. You sort of correct or qualify the word angel into just fallen angels, because it would make sense to judge the obedient ones, right? But again, when you adjust for the historical idea of how justice works out, how it is to be understood, it makes perfect sense to judge the obedient angels, because it doesn't mean doing, condemning someone for a misdeed.
Right. And by the way, in the Greek, Posh, is it krisis or diakrisis? Or am I thinking of the word discernment? I can't remember. I've read Saint Theophylact's commentary on Matthew a lot, and he mentioned judgment is the discernment of something. Maybe I'm off base there, but I thought the Greek word was krisis or diakrisis for judgment.
I honestly can't remember right now. I'm stuck with justice's dikaiosini. So it's obviously related, right? Dikao means law, So it's going to be related to it, but I don't want to give bad. Okay, Doth says
Hermeneutics.
theacrisis. Yes, theacrisis specifically. Okay, thank you, Doth. 458 nil. It's great to have people who can just, pass the ball. This is what European basketball is about, American basketball is just try and go for a 3-shot from as far away as you can.
Yeah. Well, sir,
I don't know how it turned to this, but
you guys are spreading the love. That's Serbian evangelism. We just need to get more. If we just get more centers, and less Italians in the NBA, I feel like things are going to turn around a little bit.
Yeah. We have given you the gift of Nikola Jokic. So you're welcome. You're welcome, America.
Thank you.
There's a good question in the chat about if there's a distinction between monoenergism and monergism, which is the kind of the Protestant.
No, it's just depending on how you deal with the. Unless there's something I'm unaware of, it's just how you deal with. You get these cluster of vowels when you try to combine this neologisms, these words that you're trying to create. How much do you keep and how much do you sort of try to put into try to remove for the sake of pronunciation? So I have monergism is just you leave out the O from mono, which means one energy, right? And that's the energy of God, as opposed to synergism, which syn this SYN in or SYM, if also depending on phonetics how they play out, which means with. So it's cooperation is the proper translation of that. But monergism and Protestantism or monoenergism, I don't know why it would mean the same thing, a different thing. But it means only God acts. You can't really usurp him and it stems from their understanding of God being sovereign. So everything that happens is something he did through you, maybe. But that's the same thing. And we are synergists. We believe you cooperate. You don't do this thing independent from God, but you also work with his grace, with what he has given you. Because again, he's sovereign, but he has also given you a certain amount of autonomy, and you decide whether to use it to align with him, synergize with him, or synergize with the demons. Hello, Christopher Shade, or Schade.
Das ist schade.
Is Schade short from Schadenfreude?
Das ist schade. Schade means shame. And I actually kind of identified with that because shame on this generation, shame on the world. So, good day, sir. It's great to see you streaming. I've got the posh reds.
We need to keep you in the sun for a bit longer to get the neck part. But you're getting there, which is appreciated.
Well, the posh red headphones. I got the posh. I think these are the 2s, but they'll be collector items someday. So they don't light up though. I didn't pay extra for that.
I didn't hope I had, but I had. So yeah, I don't think it wouldn't be as fun if I meant it.
Yeah. I was thinking of
one you want to ask or comment on.
Yeah, well, one thing I had a couple questions. One on the having to do with manuscript evidence and science and stuff. A little thing that I learned a long time ago, and I want to make sure I actually know what I'm talking about because I'm really just parroting it. But a long time ago, when I was studying manuscript evidence and just getting the understanding of what that is, and I found out that the entire New Testament can be recreated through the pre-Constantine, anti-Nicene fathers, basically. So
Yeah.
of all the writings of the fathers, you can recreate the entire New Testament.
Yes. In fact, one of the biggest evidences for the Johannine comma, so that is the quote, there are three that bear witness in heaven, So one of the biggest reasons that we can safely conclude that it wasn't there in the original is because it would be all over the quotations in the works of the church fathers who were battling Arianism, right, or Unitarianism of some different, stripe. But it's one of these obvious things, right? You can find John 1:1 because it's so useful. Right. This verse would be much more useful. It's so bloody clear, and yet we don't find it in the quotations, and that's one of the ways in which you can show it. But yes, we again, the church fathers quote the scriptures all the time. Right. There's no hatred of the scriptures. There's this immensely high veneration of them.
Right. And it sort of comes to my other point. I was thinking about Matthew, and Matthew saying, well, shouldn't we just have the scriptures, but the scriptures itself say there's no private interpretation.
Yeah.
Right.
You aren't allowed to just go off on your own. And by the way, in the historical context, it's not like you would have, Rob over there, and he got himself a copy. That's not going to happen. First of all, Rob wouldn't be literate. Second of all, immensely expensive to produce. Again, I'll mention again this calculation that was done, that for a copy of Romans, just the epistle to the Romans, would have cost the equivalent of $5,000 a couple of years ago. So more now with just wonderful economic and fiscal policy. So it's not something you get. Like, people give them away nowadays, which is wonderful, of course. But back, if you think just Romans is $5,000, imagine how much it would cost to produce just the New Testament, let alone the entire Bible. So insanely expensive. But also it would mean that people who would read and interpret things on their own would be wealthy people, or would be these bishops who were selected, or presbyters who were selected. So again, that's what the word heresy technically means, sect, right? It doesn't mean a wrong opinion. It means you have separated from the church, started your own thing, right? Originally, Pharisees and Sadducees and people like that were referred to as heresies, as sects, which is the reason why we wouldn't say that a church father who was wrong on a topic was a heretic, because it's not about having a wrong opinion. I might have gotten a bit off topic, but so go ahead, continue.
Oh, well, that was one thing about manuscript evidence that solidified everything 100%, and it's something that is actually almost impossible to explain to some of these people because they don't really want to hear it, is what I figure. But it is, when you can explain what manuscript evidence is, that they couldn't change the Bible, because the people will say, oh, they changed the Bible. Oh, they changed the Bible. And it's actually really retarded. It shows how retarded they are, and ignorant, really. And it kind of, because you can't, once it's out, you can't change it. Once 100 copies gets out and it gets sent to the four corners of the earth to all the different churches, and they're copying and sending letters and everything like that, you can't change it, because then everyone's like, wait a second, and that was predicted by orthodoxy, by the original church, by the Holy Spirit, through godly men, you know, and I'm just barely a catechumen, and I'm learning basically how retarded I am, and I'm smarter than most when it comes to, like, I studied the anti-Nicene fathers as soon as I became a Christian, because I was like, why are you guys fighting over something that people were, you know, warlords from 500 years ago? Like why don't we go back past, you know, the Protestants? You know, I always thought the Protestants were stupid because it's 500 years ago. Like, just by that logic, I'm like, why am I listening to these guys?
Right, but not only that, it's not that it happened 500 years ago. It's that you cannot find precedents for it. That's the problem, right? Because you have people who, and by the way, I have to correct myself from last stream because I interceded for mercy on what's his name, Enslaved by Truth, and because and Chase, after the stream, Chase sends me these shots, or like short clips from his stream, and he calls Father Seraphim Rose a faggot, and then says, laughs at the idea that Saint Gregory Palamas is a saint, even though the Byzantine Catholics venerate him and follow the idea that he is venerated on the second Sunday of Lent. So I was wrong. I was being too nice. I just thought, okay, he got a bit hot-headed, but that's not in the moment. He went on to do a stream, and I saw that. So any of you mods, when he appears, just execution. I'm not going Peter the Great. I'm going Ivan the Terrible.
Well, I think you could still pray mercy on him, which may be great judgment, and hopefully will be. You know, that thought of saying something like that terrifies me at this point in my life. Like, and I've said some things, you know, believe me, I used to follow Owen Benjamin. Like, I've said some things, and that still terrifies me. But, like, to continue on to just be like, this person, I mean, of course, I have a bigger reverence now. My reverence is starting to grow as I'm learning these things about really what a saint is. And of course, he's not sainted yet, but he is, you know, a father. You know, he, even if he's not sainted, you know, he's still a priest in the church and everything like that. Who, and I was actually warned by a priest recently about him, and he wouldn't go into details. He was like, I don't know that about Seraphim Rose. He said, I don't know about that guy. And I was like, okay. But he was a priest for a more liberal kind of church that I've been dealing with. But I thought that was funny that he would actually warn me about Seraphim Rose. He said some of his ideas are a little crazy or something like that.
I understand how people come to such a conclusion, because I understand we all had to deal with certain parts of scripture, even that we were like, this makes me a bit uncomfortable, you know. Luckily for me, every time I had that, you know, you pray for discernment, ultimately I got an answer. You know, when someone says, you know, call no man father and everything, it turns out language is a lot more complex, you know, so my background helps me with that. But I understand, you know, how, you know, religion, Orthodoxy and religion of the future, how someone who, doesn't really pay much attention to things in that regard. It could be the best priest ever, but he's hyper focused on you know, being a good spiritual father. I'm not saying running defense for your for the priest you were talking about, but it could be, you know, and then all of a sudden, what, aliens, demons, what's going on? It can sound a bit strange, but
I've listened to an audiobook of nihilism, but I haven't really delved too deep into him yet. So I'm excited about it because I have some friends who are Orthodox who are named Seraphim because they learned under Seraphim. And so there are some people that really, desire him to be sainted and stuff like that. Well, thank you very much. That one thing about about the scriptures and about the ante-Nicene fathers, I think is a powerful kind of thing that you can talk to people who think the Bible was changed. I mean, if they want to sit down and listen. But I always thought that was an amazing thing because that was the biggest argument I ever got. They changed the Bible at 300. They changed it and they canonized it and everything. And
the moment,
you don't.
Sorry to interrupt, Chris, but the moment you reach Saint Ignatius of Antioch is the moment anyone would stop making the arguments about bishops, about the Eucharist, and he's writing in at latest the early first century or
Really?
second century, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah.
The moment you read that stuff and you're like, oh wow, okay, Constantine wasn't here then, so it just goes out the window very quickly.
Just to be clear for people who might not know, he says ante-Nicene fathers, not anti-Nicene fathers. I know in English it sounds almost the same, but
you got to ante up.
Sorry?
I said you have to ante up.
Yeah,
Enemy.
Of the ante.
Yeah, it sounds more like he's saying Arius was right when he says anti.
Yes. So people don't get confused. The Latin ante with an e at the end, it means before, like antecedent, right? Something that precedes. And you've got the Greek anti, andi, right, with an I at the end. That means the opposite, against. It can mean different things. It can mean instead, but that's how when you say anti-Nicene, that just so people don't get confused about the term. So ante-Nicene fathers means the fathers before the Council of Nicaea.
For Constantine.
Yeah. And that was really wonderful to hear that about Constantine from you today, though. That little extra insight. That's something a lot of people I don't think realize, and that's actually pretty powerful to end the sacrifice of animals and the end persecution, and to really, that's actually an amazing testimony, because a lot of people think Constantine is wicked because he was used by the devil to bring to subvert,
to introduce Roman paganism, because everyone was just gathering around and talking about the Bible, drinking sweet tea. But then Constantine ruined everything. Another thing about Saint Constantine, he is a saint in the church.
Right.
I'm in the bishopric of his town of birth. So I'm very biased because of it, you see. But he also introduced the idea of, I want to address one of the biggest arguments against him, is he got baptized before death, because that's what people did back then. They found the loophole of getting baptized before death because all of your sins are forgiven.
Right.
But the reason he got baptized before death was that he wanted to go on a pilgrimage and get baptized in the Jordan. But he fell ill, and seriously ill. He ended up abdicating the throne and wore nothing but white robes, and getting baptized, and spent his last days like that. Like but so he ended up getting baptized before death because he didn't plan on dying. How can you plan on bloody dying? I can't believe it. Like, how stupid would you have to be to think that you can plan when you're going to die? Oh, I'm going to die in 3 years, so I'm going to go and like I'm going to die in a jihad, so might as well party before that. So it's completely moronic. But it doesn't matter because America is undergirded. There's always this taint of Puritanism. And the biggest thing about Puritanism is that it's anti-monarchy. And the entire revolutionary identity of America, this hatred for authority.
It's rebellion.
Yes. Means that if you say it's someone who had a crown, it's not even a king, it's an emperor, and an emperor of Rome. Right? So they will believe anything. There's this Facebook page I had to start following called Blame Constantine. It's a parody account, page, obviously, like Constantine invented decaf coffee and things like that. So if any of you still use that site for some reason, go ahead.
I was going to say, Posh, I'm impressed that you're still on Facebook.
Oh, yeah. It's still used here, but I
have to stay in touch with the boomers.
Yeah, I need to reach the boomers. It's an ascetic, endeavor for me.
With the accent, you basically are a boomer. So, cheers.
I'm as far as how old I am on the inside, I'm basically the greatest generation. But okay.
Plus, you got to find out when they're good. Sorry, I was gonna make it stupid. Okay. Continue, Chris.
Well, I was just going to say my perspective of kind of coming into Christianity late. It was after I was married and had a few kids, and that's when you really cry out to God. I had sort of what I would say a born again experience, but then it was just frustration after frustration because I was reading the early church fathers. And there was all these people that were trying to do their own thing, trying to go back to the book of Acts, trying to, we had house churches and, there was Hebrew roots type of thing. Oh, we need to have some semblancy of order, and it was all this stuff, but it was just madness. And I even got into like street preaching with some other friends of mine who coincidentally are also actually both Orthodox now. And we stopped because we didn't have a church to bring anybody to. We realized that we didn't have true discipleship and didn't have a church. And it really turned me dark towards the church in my mind, or towards what I thought, and man, the thought of like living the rest of my life going to like a Protestant church, like, oh, it feels like hell at this point. Like I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So, but we can't judge too harshly because we were once retarded as well. I am still very retarded.
We still are with the greatest of all retards. That's always a thing, a mindset to maintain.
You go in there and it's just good to listen. Like your opinion doesn't matter, And I was thinking, somebody told me that when I was talking a bunch of junk, that like your opinion doesn't matter. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Like I want to figure out what God's opinion is and line myself up with. But it's just those energies, like it's just going and being, I mean, I don't even know what it is, but I felt a little bit of what I would call compassion from the Theotokos, and also St. John the Wonder Worker, St. John of Saigon, I think.
Shanghai.
Also
Shanghai and San Francisco.
Shanghai and San Francisco.
And Johann Maximovich. Great nephew of St. John Tobolsk.
And that guy didn't like to. Well, he got in trouble by the other priests for not wearing shoes, and I'm like, I think this is my guy. So I don't know. We'll see.
Well, the idea of a fool for Christ, a saint, a type of saint, they have that place, and it's also in the Old Testament that you had, types of fools for Christ, like prophets going around naked by God's orders. Right? The idea is to sort of make them seem crazy, but it's all to call you back to God, because you get so established in this corrupt way that you need something to jolt you out of it. And it's not always God allowing pestilence and war and famine and whatever. Sometimes, you just get a crazy little dude, and that's enough. And fair
Well,
enough.
we pay attention
And
to
God bless
crazy. We definitely pay attention to crazy,
Yeah,
don't we?
yeah, because they stick out. But the idea of Christianity isn't to stick out. Traditionally, what your personality is, formed with your community. Nowadays, because the revolutionary spirit is so bloody strong, is that you are defined by not your community, but how you stick out from it. And that's just outstandingly easy for demons to usurp. Right. Okay, we've got a new addition, Silver Pie. Go ahead.
Before that, I'm going to head out. Posh, thanks for having me on. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you,
God
for
bless.
calling in, Ryan. God bless you.
God bless you,
And
Ryan.
you too, Christopher.
Also, if he's talking about the translation work, I think he's talking about, if you go on Ortho Christian, there's a link to it. But you could donate for that translation, I think.
Oh, okay. If someone can link that to me, I would be highly appreciative of it. Silver Pie, go ahead.
Hey, so on Sola Scriptura, I had a question about how iconography kind of helps to cut through, I guess, different translations or interpretations.
Oof. Well, I'm not sure it can. Iconography as in support of iconoclasm, alleged support of iconoclasm from the scriptures, or do you think the practice of iconography keeping the excesses of the Sola Scriptura approach at bay?
I guess it's like easier to describe a story, or
Yes.
if it's right in front of you.
One of the biggest problems of iconoclasm isn't actually fighting about whether you have pictures, because an icon is an incredibly deep, concept. I don't want to call it a philosophy. The idea is that Christ is the icon of God. If you reject iconography in the practice of having imagistic representations, this is, St. John of Damascus. I'm not making things up. I'm not, going on the fly. It is that if you cannot pass veneration, or in the sense of Christ, worship, by worshiping the Son, you're worshiping the Father, whom Christ is the icon of. Denying that type of process is going to be denying all sorts of things, including, how they say, why St. John of Damascus says, you don't worship the material, right? You don't worship the wood, you don't worship the paint, you don't worship any of these. You are passing things on. And that is derived also from Christology. It's not the idea of whether you have pictures or not. The idea of pictographic depiction, that is what an image is. It is just completely and utterly, historically illiterate. That's not a problem that is being discussed. And that is why we keep bringing up, quotes, verses, from, I think it's 2 Kings, saying, how God commands, pictures of palm trees and the seraphim and stuff in the temple. Because it's not about that. It's not. There's certain schools of Islam that say that images are forbidden because a judgment day Allah will ask you, well, why hasn't your creation come to life like mine has, and then send you to hell to get, have your skin burned off and then regenerated and burned off again. This madness. But I'm saying the reason people defended iconography isn't for its absolutely a massively important didactic tool, teaching tool, but also because it's the deeper implications of iconoclasm mean that worshipping Christ is not worshipping the Father. It cannot be. So this is why, if you've listened to Jay, all the time he talks about how you cannot go with these concepts we arrive at way after we've done with, we should be done at least, with our conception of the person of the Father, of the Trinity, of Christology, of pneumatology, and then all the way down the line they start with soteriology, they start with these types of things like iconoclasm, and then say, oh, we'll figure out Christology down the road. No, you can't. This is all interlocked. You cannot just go with one thing that you think is the real problem right now at this moment in time. But yes, icons are used to depict all sorts of events. The amount of symbology in them is also highly dependent on the local culture. Colors have certain meanings. How Christ is depicted wearing blue on the outside, red underneath. That color pattern doesn't red isn't divinity per se, it's royalty. So he is human, he's vested right as a human, but on the inside he is divine in the sense that he is the Lord of creation. But also, I'm mentioning it's not necessarily divine, it's royal, because with the Theotokos we get the inverse color pattern. So she is vested as royalty. She's also vested as a goddess, God forbid such blasphemy, and of course wrong Mariology. She is the Queen Mother. That's why you call her the Queen of Heaven, right? She is vested. On the inside she is blue, she's human, but vested, with this royal robe, so to speak, because she is the Queen. Okay, so all of these things, when you get certain depictions, when you get, the repose of the Most Holy Theotokos, you have her, on her deathbed, but in the background it's Christ holding her as a baby. All of these things, you have storytelling, but the problem that why I was sort of apprehensive when you started asking is that they would say, yes, but that's what the Roman pagans who invented your type of fake Christianity, right? That's how they want you to remember these things. It's propaganda. But so outside of the system of orthodoxy, you can just reject, icons as either idolatry or just decorative in different senses.
Yeah, I guess my question could have been or ill-informed, because icons are not, the purpose isn't to combat like a certain interpretation, but so I guess it's like a different context that we're living in now, than versus before the Summit.
Massively so. But also, I'm far from knowledgeable on iconography properly, because every time I hear someone who is start explaining it, I just say, well, bloody hell, might as well give up. I don't, but I feel like it. Because you realize the depth that this goes to, and I encourage people to study iconography. There's a reason an entire council was dedicated to preserving it and codifying it, so it doesn't get too open to improv. So
right.
I hope people start. If someone has any sources in English that they would recommend to people who are starting off with iconography, please mention it in the chat, or any of you here who are present, mention it live.
Well, I have this book that I found. It's called The Meaning of Icons by Losky, and I cannot pronounce the other name, but that's one that I was pointed to. I don't remember where, but that's just the book I have. I haven't gone through it at all.
Okay, so we've got that. Either of you, Longshanks, have you found any?
No, actually, only the same book that Silver Pie mentioned. I believe it's by Vladimir Losky, and there's another author behind the book. And every time I've seen it in the bookshop, it's like a massive book because it contains all these icons.
Yes,
as
people,
well.
it's a book with a lot of pictures. Do not be afraid. Okay, I'm going to try and find it on like Amazon or something and link it.
Hang on, I could.
You can talk. I mean,
well, my initial introduction to the meaning of, I guess, the meaning of icons was a patristics video where he was discussing the Trinity icon, or the hospitality of Abraham is what its official name is, but how it was teaching the Trinity, and he was talking about the different colors that are used for the different angels.
It's not the Trinity, just to be clear. Right? It's not the Trinity that went to meet Abraham.
Right.
I know people want, such easy ones to go to. That's not what happened. It is symbolic of the Trinity. But Abraham recognizes, by the way, one of the people as his Lord, sees him visually. Oh, that's the guy, right? And then goes and falls before him and brings him in and gives him the food and everything.
Right. It's a theophany of Christ, and only one of the angels received worship, and that was Christ. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Lost my place on the keyboard to unmute myself. Okay, so this is Uspensky and Losky. That's the one?
Yeah, there was a second author to that book as well, so that's probably him.
So, Leonid Uspensky. Excellent. Okay. Here you go. I mean, if you don't want to order it from Amazon, you don't have to. And just, you can follow the breadcrumbs from there. What's your preferred?
Thriftbooks.com is pretty good. If you have a local, like, half-price books, I mean, ours is pretty gay, but I find a lot of wonderful books there.
Maybe people can just find it in the local parish or like the bishopric.
Yes.
Those even tend to be much cheaper than when you try to find it on Amazon and stuff. So many times I wanted a book, and then you think, oh, why is it so expensive? But and it's like published by a publishing house, and then you go, find one on the Patriarchate is selling it. It's a third of the price or something.
Yeah, like in my parish, it's so on Amazon it's like 65 quid, and it's about half that price in my parish. So if you can do a bit of parish hopping and see if you can try and find it, that's what I normally do with Orthodox.
But promote parish hopping. That's
no.
Great.
I don't encourage parish hopping. Only
for literary purposes only.
Exactly. Well, no, Poch, I was going to bring up. Because I know, Silver Pie, you brought up like idols and like the boundary between icons and idols, and how actually, Posh, I remember a while ago you mentioned that idols are actually I don't even want to even compare them to icons, to be honest, because they go so much further in that the people who like built them actually genuinely believe that these were like alive and they were feeding them and stuff like that.
Very much so. So an idol is, first of all, a statue. That's an important thing, because the idol is supposed to serve as a body for a spiritual entity. That's a massively important and necessary component of idolatry. You know, as I said, I think it was when Jay interviewed me or talked to me, whatever, on his channel. You cannot actually have money as an idol, because it's not an entity, as in like a being. It's a thing, but it's not an entity you interact with. However, the mindset is basically the same. You know, if you devote so much time and attention to money, you might as well be worshipping, you know, an entity. However, when we talk about idols, these are statues that you ritually try to have a spiritual entity inhabit, the one you're trying to worship. And then not only do you feed them, right, you clothe them, you clean them, you usually need to peg them down so they don't topple over. That's more important, you know, depending on how big it is, right? The more extravagant the religious cult, the more they're going to be investing in these things. And not only that, but you tend to put them up in your temples. You can improvise, as we've seen with the, you know, Israelites in the desert. But there are whole components of it that completely disambiguate them from icons. An icon is an imagistic representation, but it's not a three-dimensional body for the saint. I'm also not saying that that's what Catholics do with statuary. I'm saying that, as far as the Orthodoxy is concerned, statuary doesn't really make sense within our understanding of the function of icons. It's not that Catholics believe that, you know, if you make a statue, the spirit of the saint is there in the statue. They're not pagans. However, it definitely, God bless Silva, thank you for calling in. It definitely shows that it's illiteracy and, once again, the failure to account for how a word is used historically. So, if the word was used for statuary that you indwell a spirit in and then ritually worship, you cannot say that's the same thing as having an imagistic representation of holy beings, because it's not just humans, right? You have icons of angels, archangels. That the veneration is passed on to the entity. It's veneration. It's not worship. Even when you have incense, it's not that you're sacrificing incense, burning incense. Sacrifice involves burning things. You are not burning incense as a sacrifice to, I don't know, say Nicholas the Wonder Worker. No, you are sort of sensing the icon. The incense is burned for God. So it takes multiple angles of misconception and misperception to conclude that icons, as the objects we use in everyday, you know, Christian prayer life, to equate them with idols. You can speak anything.
No, I was waiting for John to speak. But no, yeah, I guess that's the most elaborate defense of iconography we're gonna get. But no, yeah, it's just I asked that because again, there's always anti-icon stuff going around, especially these days.
And also, there are wrong ways to make icons, right? The canons for iconography tend to give a pretty rigorous, how shall we say, not pattern, but they tend to constrict what you can do and what you can do it with, because it can give the wrong impression, right? It's sort of it would be like saying in sheet music, you work with music, Drew. It's sort of like saying, oh, you don't have to put in a key at the beginning of the stave, Well, then, okay, I write a crotchet in the first space. Okay, but without the key, I don't know what it is. So if we don't standardize things, all things can be interpreted completely, differently, right? And if you have two, like the grand stave, right, as sheet music goes, usually you have it, right, the upper one is a treble, and the lower one is a bass, but not necessarily. It depends on the composition, but that's usually how it goes. And then if you're just going to assume that's how it is, but you don't indicate it, and the person who wrote it meant both to be in the treble clef, at least for a portion of the composition, right, you're going to get madness, disharmony, complete misrepresentation of what the author wanted to have represented.
Dare I say, discord.
Great. Well done. We are starting a movement of the most punny onslaught of orthodoxy that we can manage.
I feel like there's a lot of dads in the church that because of the equal number of men and women, it's like everybody's a dad of some kind, and then you got spiritual
humor, dad humor.
Dad humor's for everyone these days.
Yeah.
It just needs to be super dry, and because I know you keep on bringing up Norm Macdonald all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, that is like the fun. He's like the peak pinnacle. Pinnacle of dad jokes, and just old 1950s, like especially that. I rewatched that Bob Saget roast, and I think if
literally ripped from an old 1940s or something book for jokes for retirement, celebrations. I can't remember what you have, like those sending away parties that literally jokes for that particular occasion.
Lord have mercy.
Right. One of my favorite things Norm said was he was interviewing Larry King, and he says, as an old-timey broadcaster, do you have any old-timey broadcaster friends? It's so stupid and pointless. But old-timey broadcaster, and you're both like people like Norm was in his 50s, He says old-timey broadcaster.
And then he goes, was it Larry's just like, yeah, they're all dead.
Yeah. Had dementia at the end.
I remember all those compilations of what was it, if Norm had that Hitler joke where he pretends to find out about Hitler, and then he finds out Hitler died. He's like, oh, I didn't even know he was I didn't even know he was sick. And then there's this massive compilation of all these different like celebrities and comedians going, oh, I didn't know he was sick, like right after he died.
Yeah, it's probably the most elaborate setup anyone has ever done.
Probably.
I can't imagine like the thought process behind it, right? I mean, it's difficult for even the idea to hide your illness, and a serious one at that, for so long, but also to make this massive joke out of it
after you're dead.
Yeah, because you needed to die in order for the setup to be over. I was astonished. I was completely shocked by his death, but then you keep thinking, like, he knew, he bloody knew.
Yeah.
So, folks, we are over 3 hours. So, if you have something else to ask,
well, I thought we were you were going to pull another 5-hour stream, but
I think that was
that would be a bit insane to do consistent 5-hour streams. I wonder who else
because
does
people
those.
will get used to it, and then if I go for 3 hours, they think I'm lazy, and I don't want to get people accustomed. Sort of like if you're a girl and you start going on dates, and every time she dresses up as best she can, a lot of makeup, very meticulously applied, and then you sort of get used to it. You don't. And then you see her without makeup, and then you're like, "Wait, who the hell are you?" And so, don't overdo it on makeup, and don't go for 5-hour streams. That's what we can conclude from today's topic.
Yeah, well, oh, sorry, John.
Oh, I was just saying, that's the only important thing that came out of today's stream.
Yes, and pronouncing funny foreign words.
Oh yeah, I know I came a bit late to this stream, but to be honest, I never took Sola Scriptura very seriously anyway. So, but what other future streams are you planning to do? Because I'm guessing it's just not all Sola Scriptura debunking for 3 hours every night.
Oh no! So this is a series I will be doing. Because I want to go through specific words and then pack as much theology as I can into explaining the words and how they're used and how people get wrong ideas and why, with the best faith possible, you can understand why they would make the errors that they do. But also the Latin lessons will be starting. I will still need to practice a bit with bringing things up, because when you're teaching languages, you really need visuals and representing things, putting things in different colors, especially when morphology is concerned. So I need a bit more knowledge of how things operate. I also need good internet, which I don't know why I don't have today. I did the last time.
Well, maybe it's just because you live in Serbia, but it might be that.
Yeah. It's unpredictable. You didn't want to get too comfortable. That's what God, doesn't spare his rod on us.
Yeah.
And honestly, I do have also just scripted videos in mind, and then all types of topics that are not necessarily theological. They do tie in, but I also have a series of planned series of slogans versus proverbs, right? The differences in approach to condensing as much meaning as you can into as few words as possible, and then the opposite of that is sloganeering, which relies on saying as little as possible, but leaving as much room as possible for people to read their own preconceptions into it, and that will also be theological, because no creed but Christ, right? Which just to them sort of reinforces their ideas of but I will need to break down a lot of linguistic components of how that operates. So and then I will also do what Jim Bob does with bringing up, reacting live to different types of content. But for now, this and the Latin lessons are my focus, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Well, yeah, not to mess with whatever schedule you got coming up, but I think an interesting one And again, this kind of centers around Calvinism a bit, because it's around the whole word like preordain. And I think I was listening to, I think it was Lord of Spirits, and how actually some of the original words actually mean more like set up in advance. I can't remember the exact wording, but I think maybe there's probably something there that kind of puts a couple more nails in Calvinist theology, possibly.
Yeah, Calvinist theology is sort of self-destructing, and because you watch The Lord of Spirits, we can say, sorry, Calvinists, that it's the whole idea of God bless. Oh goodness, John. Thank you for calling in. You have this hadith in Islam, Sunni Islam, where in the afterlife, Adam and Moses are having this quarrel, and Moses is saying to Adam, "You are the reason we were kicked out of heaven." And Adam retorts with, "How can you blame me for doing something that Allah had preordained for me 40 years before he created me?" Right. And the hadith ends with Muhammad, allegedly, saying, that is how Adam confuted Moses, that is how Adam confuted Moses, that is how Adam confuted Moses. Right? So that was a win on Adam's part. So they use the term preordained. But the problem is, if you are saying that Adam cannot be blamed for the reason, for the fall, because Allah had preordained it, that means Allah preordained all types of sin. And at least they won't, like if you have debates and stuff, they won't accept that. Muslims even, but their sources are very clear on it, right? Even like, oh, Allah has preordained the amount of adultery men will do, so you can't blame them for it, and stuff like that, right? Their sources are clear. But try getting a Calvinist to admit that God created sin, and all of a sudden they lose their minds. So, well, no one made you do it. Well, what do you mean?
Oh yeah, if you don't believe in will, then I mean,
yeah. So you are not to be. You somehow created sin. You was the one sinning, but you were just part of this mechanism that God sort of wound up at the beginning. But that's not a biblical view, but it's also again a failure of understanding that God is outside of time. We cannot break it down into mechanics, but it's not that. I've even heard people say, "Oh, for God, time all of history plays out simultaneously." Well, now you've also brought him back into the concept of time. I know you can't, get out of the conception of linear time because you're human. That's how you exist. That is your relationship with time, at least while we are still in our bodies. But if you don't account for the fact that God is beyond time, you're just going to fail. And they don't account for it. That is why they have this idea that, which I try to condense into saying, they believe God is bound by time, but he's zero indexed. He's at the very beginning of time. And that means he is inside time. So that might be a stream in and of itself. So I hope I provided some insight.
Yeah, I know when it starts getting into that, it starts getting all a bit like heavy and abstract. So what was it? I finished off Augustine's last 3 books of Confession, where it's all just like theology, and it's the most insane. Most of it went over my head, but a lot of it is about like how like God is, whether he's in or outside of time, or do any of these rules actually apply? And he actually ends up like agreeing with kind of like what you were just saying. But yeah, another thing I've been noticing is what you brought up earlier with changing, what was it, sons of God to like children of God.
Yes.
And how that kind of just tears up a lot more of the meaning because of the whole like inheritance and divvying up authority and all that type of stuff. I got my creed. So I noticed I've been reading like different creeds, and like there's all sorts of weird like translation changes. So was it who for us men and for our salvation was it came down from heaven and was incarnate the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary and became man. And then like I was reading another version handed to me in church the other day, and it was like who for us humans and for our salvation became human, and it just felt really weird. I'm not too sure about that.
That's not a big problem, you know, because it would depend on what language it's translated from. Right, in Serbian it's radi nas ljudi, radi naših spasenja, sišao s nebesjeg plotio se Duha Svetoga I Marije Djevi postao čovjek. Right, for us, you know, you can say men, but actually no, it says ljudi, it says humans. But men also, in modern English, also encompasses the term just human, right? It's not the same thing as with son, because son is also a sort of a legal status in the ancient times and tradition. But I understand how saying humans sort of like when people, you know, call men males and women females, it becomes so sterile. It becomes so, you know, I don't know, cold.
It's more like it's more of a scientific category.
Yes, like biological. We Homo sapiens sapiens.
Yeah, or like a genus or a family or something like
that. Yeah, like some type of taxonomy, as opposed to, you know, dealing with theology. But no, that's not part of saying men is not part of the whole son thing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if it said who for us Homo sapiens became a Homo sapien, that would be a bit worse.
Yeah. But it is a different thing, a difficult thing in languages, especially if you account for the fact that a lot of parishes in the diaspora of Orthodoxy, you know, are sort of just going a bit into English, right? So you have a lot of parishes that are almost exclusively diaspora, so they tend to keep the original language. But then there comes a time when people start converting. I mean, God willing, becomes more and more like that, they start bringing in more English. And then you're going to have to deal with the fact that, you know, your parishioners are so used to the original language that it can cause confusion amongst them, unless you try to make it. And that's where you have to choose between technically correct and you know, sounds better. You know, it's a difficult choice to make, because you have languages like in Serbian, you cannot say men that can also mean males and men that can mean humans. We have different words for that, right? So if you were to translate it from English to Serbian, you would either have to say humans or males, let's say. There is no this in between that can connect the two, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you read a bit too much into the translation being different. I'm not sure how they're standardized in English. You would have to ask someone who lives in an English-speaking parish, you know.
Yeah, I think it's all a bit messy because where I live, because it's so like multicultural. You literally have every single type of Orthodox church you can imagine here, and they all kind of like, it's weird. It's almost like they don't really communicate with each other. They kind of like do their own thing, and so that's why I've been noticing all these like slightly different translations of like creeds and certain hymns, and all that stuff.
Do you go to a specific parish, or do you parish hop?
I'm forced to parish hop, unfortunately.
You have one of those that can't hold the service every Sunday in the same place?
Yeah. Well, one of those. It literally only does it every Sunday, and every now and again we get like once a month we get a Wednesday. But that's about it.
Okay. Yeah. That's very unfortunate when a church has to decide whether to, have a full-time priest in one parish, because there's no shortage of services, in Orthodoxy. Every day you will have, at least one. But it is what it is. I hope the situation improves. From England, I know you have Father Spiridon Bailey.
Yeah, I think I know where his church is now. Actually, I'm not going to dox him though. So,
isn't he in a monastery?
No, he's in a church.
I think he's a hierarch.
Yeah, just a church.
That doesn't mean. It can just mean he's a celibate priest. But you have also Archimandrite Philip. Have you heard of him?
No.
Okay, Archimandrite Philip. Archimandrite is like an abbot, but he is English. He is the abbot of a monastery. Spiridon is married, I think. Well, I might have. I'm sorry if I'm.
No, yeah, I remember him mentioning he's got a wife.
Well, then I'm completely wrong. Forgive me. So
on a roof,
Archimandrite Philip is not married because he's an Archimandrite. But he heads a monastery, and I'm not going to ask you to dox yourself, but maybe it's close to you, so look into it.
Yeah, I think there's only one major monastery over here in Essex, and then there's another one all the way up in Scotland, like Mull Monastery or something. And then there's another Coptic one.
Mull isn't Mull like schismatic?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I heard some stuff about them, but it was more kind of just like drama stuff. Like they had like some luxury monastery or something with
yeah. I don't know if it's an overreaction, but so you would have to ask again someone. Seraphin Goose, I think you're Scottish or something. Interject. Explain yourself.
But no, things are. I don't know. I don't want to jinx anything here, but things are kind of looking up. We had so the first church I visited. I actually got baptized in the other day, and we had, I think, 29 people there in a group baptism. So there's a lot of people converting in the UK.
I've seen. I follow a couple of. Well, you see, there's benefit. A couple of them. There's this Orthodox England, I think it's called, the page I follow, and they post a lot of rather reassuring things. So God willing, you will return to the times of Saint Cuthbert and reverse the insanity that was the destruction of monasticism.
In fact, I almost took that name, that saint name, but it probably would have been Cuthbert. A bit weird going around being called Cuthbert.
Yeah, it would seem like a douche, honestly. Well, I chose Cuthbert. You try to find the oldest sounding name. It could be interpreted as piety signaling, but I'm not going to ask you to saint name dox yourself either. You're good with D. Sims, Drew, and Longshanks. that's 3, and that's plenty of names and pseudonyms to know you by.
Cool. But yeah, man, that's all I've got for tonight, man. I'll let you get on because it's probably later. It's probably later in Serbia than it is over here.
Yeah, we're 1 hour.
Okay, that's not that bad. Well, it's 12:30 for you guys.
We're Central European time. You go to Romania, it's an hour more. So we're just at the easternmost limits of Central European time. So I know an American guy named Arthmael, named after an ancient Irish saint. I thought he would be named Patty O'Malley, but there you go. Well, wonderful, excellent to hear that your parish is experiencing growth. God willing, that can bring about a constant presence of a parish priest.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
My parish is very weird, so we borrow an Anglican church to do our service in.
Yes,
and we only get 2 Sundays out of the month. Maybe we have like 40 people on average there. But we have like 4 priests, and the church down the road that I got baptized in, what was it? They must have something like double or triple the amount we have. They only have 1 priest. So there's some managerial stuff going on there.
Can I ask? This might be doxing, so you don't have to answer. Is the one which has multiple priests, is it Serbian?
No.
Okay.
I still need to visit that one. There is a Serbian parish in wherever I'm from.
Be prepared for drinking after church. I'm going to say that. So, I mean, you're a redhead. There's probably some Irish there. You can take it.
No.
I'm being racist against gingers now. But okay. So keep us posted. I mean, if things continue to grow, let's talking about baptism of what, 28 people you said?
29 people.
29.
Well, including me, so 28, 29, yeah.
Oh, okay, 28 and you. That's glorious. I mean, I've also seen there's a video of a cathedral being consecrated by the Patriarch of Moscow in London. On Orthodox Church is the name, I think, of the channel. So, one thing we can say about the High Anglicans is they've at least kept the beauty of things, and I don't think people are willing to give it up as easily for the bass solos and biscuits after church and whatever. So I'm extremely happy to hear it, and hope more people come, because I as far as England is not doing well now.
No, have you seen the what was it, the census statistics?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, not good.
Yeah,
it was something like Christians from 59% to like 46%, and Muslims from 4% to 6%. So that is, and over the course of 10 years, which is just like.
Wasn't it G.K. Chesterton who said that the English will only remember Jesus once Muslims forbid beer in pubs?
I mean, most likely, but I don't know. I've been hearing
but
like
you can prove him wrong. You can prove him wrong, which is I suppose all of our duty to make sure it's not just this nice cultural thing. You know, you like the icons, you like the music and everything. You know, it would be the same Protestant approach. You know, if you join the Orthodox Church because you like the choral works by Tchaikovsky, it's no different than going to a church because you like the rock band. It's just a bit more erudite and sophisticated, but it's the same level of motivation, or as far as spirituality is concerned. So and in England, I think it is more genuine, because that's, if you go like Father Seraphim Bailey, Spiridon Bailey. I keep calling him Seraphim Bailey. Spiridon Bailey. You know, he was also part of the Anglican Church. You know, it's not some type of switch from 4 walls and you know, like a drum set and a podium with the, oh goodness, what's it called? Like the thing you preach behind. But then you go from that to this majestic cathedral or something. It's Anglicans have shown themselves rather capable of producing magnificent architecture and magnificent works of art. So I think people who go from that type of tradition or Catholicism, you know, into Orthodoxy, it's not just a wow factor. It's not just this superficial aesthetic appeal. I think it requires more insight, and I think it probably produces higher quality converts, if I can be a bit rude in saying it like that.
Well, yeah, I think especially even just having, or to be fair to the Catholics, they've still got a long catechism, or RCIA, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are, and this is the tricky thing with statistics in this country, because if you look at statistics, like Orthodox is like one of the only ones that's growing, but we get lumped in with Pentecostals in the statistics. It's because apparently we're a non-institutional church, which doesn't make any sense. I know it's ridiculous.
Sorry, it's not just Orthodox and Pentecostals, but in the same group with other people, I assume they didn't find just the two of us so similar that we are like a category.
I think it's because we're the small. It's probably because we're the smallest, to be honest.
God.
But to be honest, there are actually a lot of Pentecostals coming over, because I'm good friends with some of them, actually, because apparently like there's an obsession with going back to the early church, and then a lot of them through that obsession end up coming to Orthodoxy through that, and kind of just realizing that like rock bands and what is it, like gospel house music probably isn't probably isn't the way it was done back then.
Yeah. You also realize sort of the way iconography went in Catholicism. It sort of became decorative. I mean, it still depicts stuff, but it lost this very didactic, very constricted way of showing the teachings of the church, and became just, you know, babies flying around instead of the cherubim, you know, and I don't know, whatever, like buff Adam touching fingers with God, and you know, again, it became decorative. Sort of the same thing with how music is treated by a lot of these low church Protestants. It's just there to make you feel good and nice, instead of preparing you and orienting you towards worship and towards Christ.
Yeah, it's just like a big put your hands up festival.
You're participating a lot more. It's not so distant and cold and just nonsense, just people who don't, which is why we say go to services. It's rather participative. It's just not like a concert, as it's not supposed to be. It's not a point to put on like an opera show even though opera sort of developed from this concept, right? It's not an opera.
Yeah, in fact, I was surprised. We don't do. It's a bit more free in the, because my church is weird. We're like in the Russian tradition, but in the Greek church, using an old Anglican church. It's very strange. But I was surprised when I went to the Russian cathedral, like just how much like constant bowing and crossing, like every 2 seconds. It was just constant crossings and bows. And
Serbia is the same.
Yeah, man, it was almost like a workout. In fact, I was reading Saint Porphyrios, and he was and he was just like, oh yeah, prostrations are really good for, like, you know, humbling yourself and then pleasing God, and also they're really good exercise and stuff like that. And he was talking
good for your lower back. Yeah. I've only ever been to Serbian services, you know, for, you know, like you bow, and in certain, not every time Christ is mentioned, for example, because you just blow your back out, but like the Mother of God is mentioned a lot of time when God is mentioned as well, but again, because it's so often, it would sort of just end up being literally just exercising. But also, right, when you make a bow and you stay there when the priest reads out, you know, quotes Christ from the Last Supper. You know, this is my body which is broken, etc. I don't want to misquote it. I don't know it by heart in English. Like you hold the bow, and then you go back up, and then the wine, and then everyone bows when you go for the invocation of the Holy Spirit, right? The epiclesis. Okay, but that will be a topic for another time. We're over 3.5 hours, so I'm going to wean people off from the 5. It's not just going to be a drop by 2; it's going to be a drop by 1.5 hours.
Yeah, but I'll just say, because again, I said this half an hour ago, I'll jump out, but that didn't happen. But before I jump off, I was really surprised when I went up to take First Communion, and I didn't realize there were lots of like little bits of bread in there. I didn't realize that's how it worked. I was so surprised.
Yeah, I grew up with that, so it wasn't strange to me. It was strange to me when I saw what Catholics did, you know. I suppose it was sort of the inverse for you. You know, with Catholics, you see the bread, you see the host, you know, but there's no wine, or you sort of get a sip. I know they have different approaches, but yeah, I remember learning about how the Agnus is prepared and then put on the discourse, right? And then these things are cut off with this, and it's very elaborate, but I know they drop this piece of bread into the wine. so it's, I can imagine it's a surprising experience. Sort of like, did it go bad and start to curdle up?
But anyway, man, I'll see you around some other time.
Yes, hopefully with better internet. So thank you for calling in. You're always welcome to call in, and God bless you.
Yeah, no worries, man. See you. God bless.
See you. Okay, I think we had, you know, a decent presentation of the word to, and I saw I can do like 2 or 3 maybe. So I wanted to gauge how many I can do per stream. I suppose it remains to be seen whether you lose the amount of absorption of information when you increase the scope of it. But again, that's something we'll figure out as we go. It was fun. We didn't have much debate, but we did have a lot of talk and presented. I believe I've started to try and show why this word concept fallacy is pretty common and should be actually expected when you're working with a book that is between it was compiled and written between 3,500 years ago and just under 2,000 years ago. A lot changes in languages in a matter of decades. Nowadays it's not that extreme because of mass media and mass education, so you tend to have things standardized. But I think it can be rather helpful to people to give them practical examples, like I tried to do with justice, and giving you just a few verses, especially the one with Isaiah 1:17, because I think it is one of those things that tends to stick with you. Like judge the fatherless. How else are you going to interpret judge the fatherless except for help them, as in put them in the correct order? And the order is something that we build around God, God's commandments, what our purpose is, we also derive from him. So it is only appropriate to go through these certain these very contentious terms to try and explain to people why we're not twisting scripture. It's just that we haven't accrued just by osmosis, just started understanding words in a certain way that is appropriate for our day and age, but then anachronistically impose that meaning back onto the Bible. And so if any practical point you can keep from today, at least make it explain what justice is, that it is order, a godly order. It's not just a dictum from a legislative body, or rather a judicial body. It is not always a negative thing, because it's actually just putting things as they should be, as God would have them be, to the best of our abilities. So do that, try to do that, to remember that. And the best example again would be Isaiah 1:17, because it's such a stark an easy thing to remember. Also, we haven't done the word faith yet, but remember the infidelity example that I gave, because we all know that infidelity has to do with living out faithfulness. And the word fide is right there in it. It is the opposite of fide, is infidelity. It is doing something. It is a certain way of life. It's very clear. It's a commonly used word. So, God willing, it will help you try to present these ideas and have people dwell on them a bit more than trying to, go into an incredibly, difficult linguistic analysis, etymological analysis, historical analysis, etc., because that can be overwhelming, especially for people who don't do this, professionally, or people who have not really investigated it, and then you start sounding like some type of, one of them big wigs, trying to impose some type of complex academic philosophy to usurp the simplicity of the gospel. The gospel is still very simple, but if you're misusing the Bible as this type of textbook, you are going to get mistakes, and that is what we're trying to correct. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for all the people. Thank you all the people who have come, called in, and participated. We'll be doing a lot more of this in the future, and I'm looking forward to it. And God willing, make this a very regular thing. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and God bless you all.